show of hands, who's got power?
As of last night.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Late last night.
Okay.
Sorry, Steph.
Okay, does everybody have water?
As of maybe.
Okay, yeah.
Internet? Who's got internet?
Good.
We're on the beach, we don't have anything.
Yeah, exactly. It felt like a really life-altering experience. But thank you for being here. So let's start with Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Carol, do you want to do a roll call?
Yes, Lorraine Koss.
Here.
Charles Venuto has asked to be excused. John Byron.
Yo.
Vinnie Taranto. Here. Don Windsor.
Here.
Terry Casco.
He's on his way.
Okay. David Lane.
Here.
Karen McLaughlin.
Here.
Stephanie Ellie.
Here.
John Durkee.
Here.
Courtney Barker.
Here.
Todd Swingle has asked to be excused. Dean Artusa.
Here.
Danielle Bowden.
Okay, so we have a quorum. And moving to approval of the agenda, we have a couple of changes. One would be that Vinnie is not going to be joining us. So that we will not have a communication update. And then Virginia has some other changes.
This is hard. Let's try to make it bigger. So down on the, under new business, we need to table some items that last month you had asked us to bring you proposals on a number of things, and we just haven't received those proposals back from folks. People are busy doing other things. So A, C, and D, if we can table those to October. And then E, we got a request from Indian Harbor Beach to consider a change in the way we do cost share for stormwater projects. And you should have a handout on that item, so we can take that up when we get there on the agenda.
Okay, so I'll make a motion that we strike 7A, 8A, 8C, and 8D, and that we add 8E, the Indian Harbor Beach proposal.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, passes. Now, the minutes, has everyone had an opportunity to read the minutes? I know it was difficult for me with only Sal, but I quickly went over them, and I didn't see any problems with them.
I move to approve the minutes. Second.
All those in favor? Aye. That passes. Okay. Monthly progress report.
Okay, thank you. So the progress was a little less this month than other months for obvious reasons, but we tried to move things along the best we can. The big news is I want to introduce your fourth employee, Anthony Gubler. Anthony has a bachelor's in science in oceanography from Florida Tech. He grew up here along the Indian River Lagoon. He has a master's in environmental management from Duke University. Most recently, he was employed by the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Sciences, where he had the lovely job of knocking on people's doors in our community and telling them that their citrus tree or other plant that they love in their yard was infected and needed to be addressed. So we think he's very experienced at knocking on people's doors and giving them news that they might not want to hear about their septic system. He's also has experience with a landscape company, and he's done internships and short stints with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the Midway Atoll and with Marine Fisheries in North Carolina and with the Ocean Conservancy. So welcome, Anthony.
Thank you.
All right, and we hope to have our fifth position sorted out later this month. The second bullet on the progress report is the Long Point Park septic upgrade. This project was actually scheduled for year 1, but due to delays in some other year 0 projects and the dollars rolling in ahead of schedule, we were able to work with Public Works and knock this project out last month before the storm, so it's done. We have cost share contracts underway now with 3 more cities, Cape Canaveral, Indian Harbor Beach, and Melbourne. Rockridge Breeze Swept Septic Sewer Project is continuing to make progress. They've now connected 79 homes to sewer. The MIMS muck dredging project, they were beginning to try to mobilize right before the storm and had to stop that. And so, there's a small delay there with trying to get started, but that'll be up and running soon. The MICO Septic to Sewer project, all of the survey that we need to design that project has been collected. So the design is underway now. The design engineer, we went out to bid and collected proposals. We have selected a contractor, a consultant for the Sykes T project, which is Horty Point on Merritt Island. And we are working on interviews with the consultants, the prioritized consultants for the other 2 county septic to sewer projects. And the dashboard graphics that Vinny showed you last month are now posted on the website. So, yay, Vinny's here. Courtney, who you met last month, has reached out to cities to, per your action last month, recommending that we go ahead and reach out to cities to try to get their year 2 and year 3 projects under contract so that they can get the design going on those. She's reached out to the cities, so hopefully in between storm prep and storm response, they're working on those work plans. Vinny continues to work on communication strategy improvements, which will come up later on the agenda. The ferrate treatment negotiations continue with Florida Tech. The muck dredging master plan, we got a scope of work. We've made revisions. We've sent them back to the consultant. We just haven't gotten the final draft yet, which is why we tabled that item on this agenda. Legislative funding requests to match these dollars in next year's legislative session. Those forms, the first round of forms, are due later this month. So we're hoping to get this storm put behind us and get to work on those forms very soon to figure out the best way to leverage these dollars. I was on the phone with Senator Mayfield last night. She is working on a $20 million funding request for septic to sewer grants. And so we are working on supporting that request as well. And the Florida Tech IRLRI research on muck, they've finished, well, the majority of those PIs have finished their 2nd year of work and given us draft reports for their 2nd year. And we've provided suggested edits, and we should be getting those final reports back fairly soon. Is there anything you want to add to that, John?
There are reports in different stages of coming in. Some are closer to being finished, others are going to take longer.
But there's some really great information in those reports, so I'm looking forward to having the final reports to be able to share with you all. And then, an assortment of meetings last month and coming up this month, and continued opportunities for volunteers to participate. So I think that's all I wanted to point out on the staff report, unless you have questions.
I have a question or a comment, rather. Throughout this, there will be requirements for consultants and engineers to work with projects. I wonder if maybe it would be useful to develop an IDIQ contractual or series of contractual bodies that allowed work directly with task orders. It'll cut down on the admin, do 2 or 3 year multi-years. Is that something you've thought about, indefinite quantity, indefinite
Yes.
duration?
Yes. So,
You know, and some jurisdictions, they'd be available for, say, a city to jump in on at a predetermined price and so on. It's something I really think would add some efficiency.
right. So all of the projects that fall below the state's threshold for the competitive CCNA, competitive negotiation, I don't know what the second C is. Consultant Negotiation Act, thank you. We are using the consultants that were previously selected
Okay.
for up to a 5-year contract for the types of work that are adopted in the plan. And we continue, cities can piggyback on any of those contracts. For projects that exceed those CCNA amounts, we are required by state law to do a specific search for those projects. And so that's why these Sykes M, Sykes T, and Central C projects have to go through a separate search because they exceed those state standards.
Thank you.
This is minor, but each month we continue to negotiate regarding the IP. And when those folks were here, I point blank asked who owns the IP, and the response I got was Brevard County does. Apparently that's not correct.
That was misleading.
No longer operative.
No, that's not exactly what the contract said.
Thank you.
All right, anything else on the staff report before we move to the financial report?
Is there any read on how the river fared in the storm?
There isn't. I do have a graphic that I was going to share right after this,
Sure.
if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I think this is absolutely fascinating. So this is a history of hurricanes and tropical storms in the Atlantic Ocean. And you see September 10th there at the peak. So, that's what we just went through in terms of the frequency and intensity of storms. We were
That
at
includes the data from the storm, or that's before?
No, this is a long history of hurricanes and tropical storms in the Atlantic Ocean. And I wish I knew the source. I couldn't find it because I have limited access to all my files. But so this is a graphic that some researchers at Florida Tech put together right before Irma that was based on some of the earlier projections of the path. So after this was done, the path shifted west, and then the path shifted back east. So please don't pay a lot of attention to the exact color ramp there, but the idea is that based on the storm being west of us, the winds would be driving water north up the lagoon. And so you see the water piling up, especially in the northern extents of the Banana and Indian River Lagoon, and also right up here, up Sykes Creek. And so Matt and I were fortunate enough to be able to go up in a helicopter yesterday to inspect all the mosquito. We have several hundred miles of berms that surround the mosquito impoundments. Many of them were overwashed and damaged. So we were assessing damages to that, and Matt was also collecting information on derelict vessels in the lagoon. And we very much saw extremely turbid waters, very dark colored waters in the northern ends of both water bodies. And as the manatees and the dolphins were swimming through, they were just kicking up gray and black goo in the northern end of the lagoon. Whereas down here in the central part, where the water elevations didn't change as dramatically, there were areas where the water was clear. You could see the sandy bottom. So we also saw a brown bloom of some sort starting up here north of 528 in the Banana River. The water was so turbid up here, you wouldn't have been able to see a bloom for everything else that was going on.
That bloom started before the storm.
Yes.
In that area, the bloom started before the storm, about 3 weeks ago.
Yep.
So that's all I can tell you.
Yeah, we'll probably know more next month, right? We'll see.
As time goes by.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, so for the financial report, we had another good month of collections, and so we have received $21.7 million of the $25.5 that were projected for this year, and the majority of the operating expenses there include that Long Point Park project that we were able to knock out this year. That one was scheduled for $101,000 and change. We completed it for just over $50,000. So we're looking forward to measuring the performance of that one and seeing how well that works.
Wait, operating expenses of $100,000, but the Long Point thing down here is $50,000. Did you just confuse the two? I don't understand. I thought operating didn't include projects.
Okay, you are absolutely correct. We, in our county books, in the SAP system, we had to pay for that project out of operating because we don't have an IO set up for it this year because we had budgeted for it for next year. But for the purposes of this form, we showed it to you where it's supposed to be. So,
So we didn't actually spend $50,000 twice?
no.
Okay. And so actually in that top section, we could take $50,000 from the operating expenses and move it down to the Sorrel projects, making that $400,000. That would make more sense.
I will have to check whether that, the 100,000, in the total assigned column under expenditures,
Yeah.
that 100,000, 527.24, I'll have to check whether that 49,000 is in there. Because I'm not sure.
Okay.
All right, that's it for the financial.
I have a simple request.
Yes.
Let's get rid of the pennies. Let's get rid of the hundredths of percentage points. Let's round up or down. The IRS can do it. I can do it at home. Please.
Our finance people will hate that.
Well, this is a report to us.
Yes.
This is a report to us in the
That's a
community.
simple
Let's make
thing
it
to
easy
do in the
reading.
column, yeah.
Yes. All right.
Okay. So a couple of our members have joined us, let the record show. That Terry Casto is here, and let's see who else walked in. Oh, Vinny. And Vinny, we took you off the agenda. We got to put you back on. How do we officially do that? A motion?
Ignore it.
Virginia? What, we, in my motion, I had taken Vinny off the agenda because I didn't think he was
Okay.
coming.
Yeah, I guess you need a motion to put him back on.
Okay, I'll make the motion. Vinny's back on the agenda. Do I hear a second? All those in favor? Aye. We were looking forward to that. Yes, any opposed? And let's see, was Gene here? Did he get on the record as well? Okay, good. So we're all set.
Yes.
Okay, so now we get to move to our special presentations. starting with Terry Williamson from the Stormwater Environmental Scientist. Terry is a 15-year environmental science expert. He's an adjunct instructor at City College and online instructor at Indian Wesleyan University. And he's 6 years with the NMR.
Thanks for having me. So I guess everybody weathered the storm okay, so I'm glad to see you here, and thanks for having me. So today, so I am Terry Williamson. I work right over there with Virginia and her crew. So basically, we're going to start talking about monitoring performance and measuring successes and what that looks like. My timekeeper. You want to add an extra 5 on there? Okay, 20 minutes right here. Okay, good. All right, so basically what I'm going to talk to you about is I'm going to talk to you about the stormwater runoff, which is the portion there in green. And then I think our other panelists will talk about muck and then groundwater as we move along, okay? You've probably already seen that a few times, I'm guessing. Just a quick introduction there. So another you've probably seen, these are a dime a dozen, this figure, you've seen it before. So basically we have rainfall creating runoff, okay? When it hits impervious surfaces, he calls the stormwater runoff, and of course that leads directly into our bodies of water and the lagoon, right? And so with that, we have pollutant loads that are rinsed into our water bodies. So, and of course, the imperviousness is related to the amount of runoff. Obviously, the more development, the more runoff. And then with that runoff comes a potential of taking a lot of nutrients, a lot of pollutants with it into our water bodies. So, let me back up just for a second. So my group over there, there's two different things we need to talk about. We need to talk about research, and we need to talk about monitoring. My team does monitoring. Okay, there's a difference between research and monitoring. We need to make that pretty clear up front here. So research is going to be the how and the why. That's the FIT guys, the UCF guys, Bethune-Cookman. There's a whole slew. All right, so they look at the why and the how. For example, why is pollutant A here and not B, and vice versa, or whatever. They focus on hypotheses testing, understanding the underlying mechanics and causal effects, okay? So that's research. Monitoring, on the other hand, we look for long-term trends, okay? Long-term trends, calculate some loadings, tracking things over time and space, okay? Looking at patterns. Okay, so if you think about it, those are some differences there. That's what we do. The objective of monitoring is basically we need to, and I'll talk more about this in a minute, is clearly define the objective. So we're not wasting time and money, right? We need to look at what we need to know, not what would be nice to know, okay? We need to be very focused on what we're doing. All right, so as I was developing this, water quality monitoring program, so this is the big picture. Basically, the far left corner in the green, we have just the components of what do we want to know and how we're going to find that out. Okay, so that's the early stages. And then the bright yellow, the data collection, data handling, that's the field work. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's the field work, and that's the lab work. We have trained and excellent techs that do all that. Okay, and then the orange color, that's, of course, the evaluation. And what you'll find is there's a lot of back and forth. Collect some data, look at it, do some evaluation, go back, collect some more data. So this back and forth type thing. And then finally, information utilization, and that's the feedback. And any changes that need to be made, any tweaks that need to be made for next time, that's where those are made, okay? So if you want to, so that's the big picture. If you want to shrink that down and look at it more closely, these are 9 key successful monitoring program concepts that I'm going to talk about real quick. Oh, okay. So the 9 of them, okay?
Real quick.
Yeah. I got time. I got 20 minutes, he said. Or 30 minutes. All right, so and some challenges as well. All right, so again, back to the appropriate objectives, okay? Must be defined up front, and the program adapted based on the hydrology and land use, okay? So this is the early stages, put some thought into it, okay? Secondly, some preliminary monitoring. So this is before the project starts, okay? Before we start building, before we start construction, before we start installation. To determine water quality variability, type of monitoring, pollutants to consider, okay? Right? Not every installation is going to remove everything, right? And then the technical and financial feasibility. All right, and what I mean by this is if you look at the graph, this is just a very simple line graph showing parts per thousand of salinity, of salt, in a particular pond. So we did some preliminary work. If we stop here on the far left corner, do I have a little thing here? Yeah, if we stopped over here, we had pretty fresh water, right? Parts per thousand is around 3, okay, that's pretty fresh. Okay, if we just stopped there, we might have installed a floating vegetative island that was only freshwater plants, only to have them die off when the salinity level rose up, right? So knowing that ahead of time saves us time and money, okay? Also, preliminary monitoring defines the area, environmental conditions, and the process must be fully understood. So we need to understand the whole picture. The design, so types of pollutants, station location, sampling frequency, sampling equipment, etc. So, real quick, so this, we did some grab sampling along the perimeter of this pond. Does that fully represent the pond water quality? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on what you're looking for. It does a good job of looking at the littoral zone, but maybe not so much at the water column in the middle, right? We typically use a lot of fancy equipment. This is a automatic water sampler that we use, especially when we're looking at inflow and outflow. Sorry. Okay, yeah. So then number 4, field monitoring options include in-situ measurements, sampling of appropriate media. Yes, so floating vegetative islands, everybody was like, let's look at the water, look at the water, look at the water to find out if they're effective. No, look at the plants. What does the plant tissue tell you, not what does the water tell you, all right? So that has to be thought up and thought about. Number 5, hydraulic monitoring. All right, so this is looking at water level and flow related to precipitation. This is a hydrograph here on the far right. Basically, the red is your rainfall coming in, and then your slug of water. This is what it really looks like. This is just a pull off the internet. This is what it really looks like. And so basically it tells you a lot. So you can see the rain is up top. This is your rainfall. Okay, this is your flow. And then this little bit down here is where we started collecting samples over time. Okay, and you can tweak that according to what you want to find out. And so that gives you a pollutant load. Okay. Number 6, laboratory activities is basically laboratory. So you have sample preservation, hold times. Kind of tricky. A lot of the stuff has to be 0 degrees Celsius. You have to keep it cool or it's no good. We have hold times. Sometimes, like for nitrates and nitrites, it's 48 hours. So technicians have to go out there, collect the sample, and get that to the lab with a certain amount of time. Fecal coliform is 6 hours. Okay, so it's not just walk out there and grab a sample and you're done. Right? A lot more to it. Very important. Number 7, data quality control. Is basically following SOPs that we use, the ones that DEP put out, to basically to demonstrate that the samples that have not been contaminated. We have a whole list of different things we look for, test for, equipment, so forth. What's going on here?
Just go. Just go.
Okay. I'm almost done. Data interpretation. Yes. It's like, okay. So this basically data interpretation is very difficult. You got to look at the big picture. You got the data. We're reporting that to you guys, the relevant authorities. But you got to look at it. So like this middle picture, real quick, the water quality. If you just looked at the water, nutrient loading was undetectable. Okay. However, the bigger picture says the naiad and the coontail has soaked it all up. which is great unless it dies off and releases that back into the water column, right? So you get, those are the type of things that kind of come about when you're looking at the big picture of that. There we go.
Great. So we'll take,
Go ahead, sorry.
we can take a couple of questions, but let's try to keep them directly related to the presentation so we can get to the panel and make sure we...
On the hydrologic, that,
This is a different one, but go ahead.
is the rainfall collected right where your monitor is, or do you have rainfall collected from
No,
somewhere?
it's actually, so the tricky part of that is we have, if we want to collect at the inflow and outflow, each one will have a rain gauge there at the inflow and outflow, and that's part of the trigger. If we get so much rain, it'll trigger that unit to start up as well as flow. Yeah, absolutely.
And where are those rainfall data? Are they available to the public, or are they hidden away in the cloud?
Neither. Yeah, so that data we plug into our computers back at the office and put them through a software program called FlowLink. And then we can get pretty little graphs like this, but that's where that data is held, is actually in the office. Yeah. But available as needed, I guess.
Yeah, a couple questions.
Sure.
Do you have a baseline year that you're measuring from?
Not really, no.
So how are we going to know the effect of 10 years of trust fund if we don't anchor it at the beginning?
Well, I think,
You want me to?
I was thinking seagrass, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So Terry's talking about monitoring the performance of specific projects.
Right.
And I think that your question is about the lagoon response.
Okay.
And so there's a separate monitoring program of water quality in the lagoon. And it's got a long record. Maintaining funds for that monitoring, done mostly by the Water Management District, is always a struggle because they're always looking for, how can they shrink those budgets. And so it's very important that we keep that long-term monitoring going so that we can track the trends.
As we are doing with the dashboard, and as this group represents the interests of the community and also the commission, we need to have simple, dumb metrics displayed, as we have discussed several times, and really available. Last question I have you seen any effects of, in recent times, of the fertilizer regulations, which have been in place now, most places, a couple, 3 years?
Me personally, I think it's still early.
Okay, fair answer.
I think so. I don't think it's going to be over time. Yeah.
We saw an immediate decrease in sales. But to be able to see the response in the lagoon is something else.
So, just to clarify,
Sure.
Terry, what
Yes.
your projects are going to do, for example, when they begin the muck reduction project in Titusville, that's the first one's going to happen, there will be monitoring there, I'm making this assumption, so that we will know what the water was prior to and after the dredging project. That's a very specific thing.
Sure.
Versus water management, where I can go to my laptop and pull up 15 years worth of data and chart it anywhere.
My understanding is certain projects,
Defer.
I will defer that to Dr. Trefry. Apparently, he will speak on that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Okay, great. And I just wanted to say, perhaps I didn't introduce you correctly, Terry.
I think you did, yeah.
Okay.
I think you did.
So 6 years with the Natural Resources
That is
Management
correct. That is
Department.
correct. All right, thank you.
And next we have Dr. Listopad. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. She is the president and founder of Applied Ecology Incorporated and an adjunct professor at Florida Institute of Technology. She has been working in the private sector for over 16 years, all of which dedicated to public clients and water resources. Dr. Listopad specializes in the application of GIS, remote sensing, modeling, and statistical analysis to natural resources management.
Thank you. So today I'm going to speak a little bit about groundwater, and Terry introduced the overall picture on how important groundwater is to be monitored. He talked about specific stormwater projects, and I'm going to talk about how we are looking at and monitoring groundwater projects. So just very briefly, I'm going to give an introduction, kind of tie into the Save Our Indian River Lagoon project plan. And what I did is it is definitely a critical component of non-point source solution to look at groundwater. So some of the diagrams that Terry had actually show that besides stormwater, there's some of the water infiltrates in the groundwater, and also some of that pollution goes and eventually ends up in the lagoon. So besides that, I wanted to look at, I want to point out that your Saving River Lagoon project plan focused on 3 types of reduce projects that directly target groundwater, reducing the pollution in the groundwater. And I tried to use the same colors as you used in your project plan, so there are 3 different types of projects, and those are the ones I'm going to talk about. And the first one is wastewater treatment plants, the upgrades for reclaimed water. And I put the amounts on there, 9.4 million, at least from what I saw. Septic system removal and septic system upgrades. And I know there's been a lot of talk about these. Monitoring groundwater is actually quite challenging. There's many reasons why that's challenging, so I want to kind of caveat that before I go into it. One of them is it is newer than stormwater. We have been doing stormwater monitoring for a long time. We have a very specific objective. We have a project put in place, and we monitor before and after, or inflow versus outflow. With groundwater, there's a lot of sources that might contribute to the pollution, so it is challenging. There's a lot of variables that impact, and those are they're not constant. So they not only change through time, and that's a little Terry talked about stormwater too, how you have to monitor really annually, temporally, but it also changed spatially quite a bit. So this makes it challenging. And like I said, there's no clear table that we have set that says, we're going to reduce 30% of pollutant loads if we retrofit this specific septic tank. It depends on a lot of variables. So I want to just point out, and this is actually real data from one of my sites, just monitoring 6 events. I want to talk about just temporal variability before going to the complicated spatial variability I'm not going to touch. Just to give you an example how variable it is. This is from a well that we put in, shallow well, and we were monitoring, here I just pick nitrite. And so I have 2 axes. The rainfall is the bar graphs. So this is the rainfall we have on site. And we have also, we measure basically specific samples. We go there and we purge the wells and we grab the samples and take them to the lab. So those are our orange dots in here. And what you can see, this is just between June and the end of August. Just 2 months of data, just to give you about every 2 weeks we go out there and we sample. And you can see it's very easy to say, wow, this looks pretty constant. But you can see here on a day that rained, this is actually just as it finished raining, we went out and we grabbed the sample. You can see a huge spike in nitrate. So we typically had between 0 and 2 milligrams, and we had about 14. So that shows you how variable it is, and that how easy it is to miss some of these spikes. And this is just 2 months of sampling. Obviously, we're going to keep sampling. So that makes it challenging because it is costly to monitor very frequently. So you have to weigh in how much do you monitor versus how much accuracy you want to get versus how much money you want to spend. So this gives you an idea. So how can we address this variability? And this was just temporal. Then we have to add the whole spatial. If we put the well here versus a well there, we have different results. We could have there's different flows. Think of it in terms of groundwater is kind of like a river that's going underground. Well, a river, you can see exactly where it's flowing, right? We kind of make assumptions until we start putting wells in to know exactly where the groundwater is flowing. So that makes a big difference on that. So we try to address this variability by trying to design monitoring before you actually put projects on the ground. That would be a very important thing. So we know we want to do this septic to sewer conversion. We should already be thinking about where would I place wells, where's the hot spots of the loads would be flowing into the river. Should we be monitoring before so that we can have before versus after, like we mentioned data. So also, obviously, we should be sampling throughout the year. We shouldn't just go there in the wet season or the dry season and make assumptions. And preferentially, it really should be more than a year. We could have very dry years versus very wet years. Conditions really are very different. We should have multiple wells, like I said. We could very easily miss the flow that we are expecting if we just use one well and we assume that this whole retrofit is performing according to the sampling sites of one particular place. And like I said, before implementation monitoring really adds a lot of detection power. We really should monitor before we put these projects on the ground so that we can compare after. And then we have no other option but to use some modeling to expand, to be able to do some assumptions beyond that specific site. So this is where some of the modeling, there's quite a bit of different types of models out there that look at groundwater, but one of them that's being specific for septic, if that's what we're talking about, FDP funded a tool that helps you look at the contribution of septic tanks, depending on where the septic tanks are. This is called Arc Inlet. It was developed by FSU. So we use that, and that tool is actually helpful, and I'll show that, to help cite where we should be putting those wells in. So this is what the tool looks like. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I want to leave it up in case you want to know more questions. It basically is a spatially driven tool. It gives you those pretty plumes. If you put in where the wells are located, you have to put in what type of soil, some other variables that you have to put in, and then it gives you an estimate on how much of the loads end up in the water body. And it requires quite a bit of data, and one thing I wanted to point out is it is site specific. So again, we can run this tool with best available data, but you really need to go out there, collect data, and plug it into your model and run it again. So it needs to be calibrated for, how far is the groundwater from the surface. That makes a big difference. It needs to be calibrated for what kind of concentrations we typically see near the septic tank. It's making a lot of assumptions before you put the data in. So I'm going to move on and talk about two specific projects, which I believe the first projects that are looking at groundwater monitoring right now. First one is what I'm calling it the Turkey Creek study. It has a longer name. And this is part of the Florida Tech Impacts of Environmental Muck Dredging project, and Dr. So is actually the PI on this. It was initiated in November 2016, and it actually looks at groundwater. It's hard to see in the graphic, but in 4 different kinds of treatments. So it's not only a septic project, a lot of people think of it that way, but actually are looking at sanitary sewer area, a septic area, an area that we call natural, a controlled, so we wanted to compare a controlled area, and reclaimed, an area that has reclaimed water. So see if I can see. So this area, this is actually, of course, this is at Turkey Creek, and this is the Turkey Creek Sanctuary that we picked out as our obvious control area, natural. This is a reuse area right here, this closest one we could find to the Turkey Creek. The 2 red areas are the 2 areas that are still on septic as of now near Turkey Creek. We actually selected this area here for our monitoring because it was more densely packed at more septic tanks. And finally, the purple area is all area that's sewered on the other side. So we have 2 wells placed in each of these areas, and this is what we could afford doing. We wish we had more wells. Like I said, it's costly to install wells. And we actually used modeling to select where we should be putting these wells, particularly in the septic area. We installed the wells in June and started monitoring monthly. So I want to show you some this is just some pictures of
June this year?
This year, yeah.
So none of this was pre-work that was down there?
No. So this is all work.
Brand new.
Brand new. So I'm not sure you have seen any of these data, but just give an idea of running this Arc Inlet model in the septic areas. We looked at the plumes before we had data to calibrate it, and we said, okay, well, it looks like the flow is going this way. It looks correct from the data we have. This is where we're going to put the wells in. We calibrated a model once we started measuring the water levels to try to make the model fit the data, and this is kind of our installation. We used a geoprobe and had to get. It was quite a long process. Sounds simpler than it is to get permission from homeowners to put wells in, etc. So some preliminary results. And so 8 wells. They all have different colors. I just want to point out a few ones. For ammonia, we had one of the septic wells had, pretty consistently higher ammonia, 4 milligrams per liter. And one of the natural wells, which is the one actually in the north side, which is far away, also had quite a bit of ammonia. The other wells, not so much. Nitrite data. And this is where it was a little bit surprising, I think. I guess to me it was surprising. We had quite a bit, the reuse, which is in purple, one of the wells, which is basically one of the wells, it was in the middle of the common area where we did have a lot of reuse. They're spraying reuse quite often, reclaimed water. It's been consistently high, and I just want to point out the units between 10 and 15 milligrams per liter that we are measuring on the groundwater for nitrate in this particular reuse community. For the septic, it's been variable. So in July, it was quite high, 21, 22. It's dropped a little bit to 5, but these are numbers probably a lot higher than probably Terry sees in some of his stormwater projects. So this gives you an idea, right?
Yeah.
22.
The lagoon is .04.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good standard reference. So we're putting in 10 to 15 milligrams. If your groundwater near Turkey Creek has that level, then it is something off.
What does the reclaimed water out of the spigot contain?
Thank you.
This is a good question.
Total nitrogen 12 milligrams. There is the regulated amount, and it's really
Average.
But this Palm Bay WRF is in our plan for upgrade, and the reason is because it's currently discharging on average at 27 milligrams per
Yeah. So at first I was shocked, but then that made sense if the reclaim is treating it to 27.
The wastewater facility effluent is that high?
Yeah.
The water that they have treated
Yeah.
that is now going out in reuse lines for people to irrigate with is that
27.
high. Yes.
And the target is below 7, right?
In our plan, it's 6. Yes. Below 6.
Yeah, so that just gives you an idea. I was shocked at first, and Virginia said, no, it makes sense. So I was like, something is wrong with the first measurement, but it's been consistently above 10, above 11, actually. So that's something to look at. Do we have time to go over Brevard?
Sure.
Okay, so the Brevard subdivision, this is obviously the City of Rockledge septic sewer conversion project that was already mentioned here, so I thought you might be interested in looking at some of the preliminary results from it. We did also model and use, this is the same arc inlet, and we used arc inlet along with other practical constraints on where to put some of these wells. They actually had quite some ridges in some of the yards, and we couldn't put the geoprobe or up those, so we had to move some of them. But particularly 26B, it was at the center of a lot of the plume loading, so we really were lucky we were able to put it in there. This is really, I want to mention, it's the first monitoring project that actually was designed to try to measure the success. So it does have a little bit of the before versus after monitoring. So as soon as it uses what we call the BASI type, before and after control impact, and I wanted to show a quick graphic of what that actually typically means. You might hear about that. And this is where you have two different types of sites. One is where you expect impact to occur. We call those treatment or impact sites. So this would be the 3 wells inside the subdivision where you actually retrofit. Your impact is actually removing the septic. And the other ones are some sites nearby, similar conditions, but they are going to stay on septic. They're not going to change. So you expect those sites to behave constant through time. So this before and after BASI design allows you, and this is kind of data from something completely different, but just to show you as an example, it shows you that both types of sites behave the same in the beginning, but then this change takes place. We call this an impact, but this in this case would be the retrofit. You'll be connecting septic to sewer in that subdivision. And then you would start seeing differences in one versus another, right? So this change, the difference between the two, is what you are looking for to say, hey, is it working, is it not working? This is just an example graphic of what it looks like. So City of Rockledge, the monitoring we're doing is trying to mimic some of this. Right now we have 5, I want to show that. We have 5 wells installed. These 3 wells are inside the subdivision is where you expect to see changes once we retrofit it. And these 2 wells down here are what we call control wells. It's a subdivision, it's similar soils, and it's on septic, and so far it's planned to stay on septic. So we installed those wells in June, And because they were already starting to connect, this is the real life scenario, we had to quickly try to gather as many samples as possible, so we had some before. So what we are lacking here, our before, is those June through the end of August samples. We stopped to collect. We had 6 samples before. To be nice to have had a year to collect those and have annual variation. Right now we have wet season. That's what we have to work with. It's better than not having pre, but we have that for both the top, the wells inside the subdivision and the control wells. So right now we're waiting for all the connection to stop, and then we'll start monitoring again after, and hopefully throughout 2 years. So we're going to monitor every 2 months and see if we start seeing some trends, some changes in those wells that are now near connected sites. So we only have the 4 connection results. So I just wanted to show you some median values right now. And actually, I was surprised to see the fecal where the median values were quite low of the fecal, and TN was between 1 and 2.65. Those are median values. Of course, like I said, there's a lot of variability. If you look at the max values we collected, they're quite different. So we did have some spikes of fecal, particularly after the first rain event. The first event that we caught in June is just 2 days after it started raining, after a very long dry season. We also had some TN spikes just typically after actually the rain event, a couple of days. So that just gives you some data. I'm hoping to see eventually in 2 years or a year from now start seeing some differences. Do we see a reduction in some of these concentrations, and maybe fecal will completely disappear, hopefully, from the areas that are connected. Okay, so very quickly, conclusions. It's challenging. It requires a lot of effort and time and planning. Really, the modeling is necessary, is important to help prioritize where you should put in these retrofits, how you should be placing these wells for monitoring. And so don't expect to measure success accurately using limited sampling in one well. There's so much variability. You really need to invest some time in this. And we definitely need more monitoring, particularly in both septic reuse subdivisions and sewer. So the focus only on septic, we should be careful, make sure we look at the other ones. The preliminary data does show that there's a potential for reducing some of the groundwater pollutant contribution by just upgrading some wastewater treatment plants, which I guess it's a good thing if you think of it that way. So I think that's it. That's my last slide.
Great.
Questions?
Yes.
3 or 4 months since I've been here, so I'm just sort of pent up with questions. I hope you'll.
Oh.
Okay, as long as they're directly,
Okay.
just so they're directly related to her
Three
presentation.
quick ones.
Okay.
Back to the chart that showed the spike in the before and after the Backey chart. Are we
Yeah.
looking at, this is the difference between the control site, okay, so big difference, okay, great.
Well, yeah, this is not real data. Just want to point out. That's not, I just kind of wanted to make something really
Not relevant.
wrong.
Fake.
Okay.
Fake data. That's fake data. The other
Let me
chart
try a
over there
second
really was
question.
real.
Everything
This is
else
like
was real.
John
Real.
Hanson.
I
Okay,
wanted
that
to
one
show
was
something
not
very-
operative. Okay, we'll take that out. All right.
Yeah. I just wanted to show you what we're looking for now to make that clear. Because the back design is not.
Okay. You talked about groundwater flow and underground rivers. So do we think that's a fairly static flow, or is it variable? Do the rivers move around, or do we know?
The elevation definitely moves around significantly. And that's when we're installing wells, that's been one of our challenges, right? So it definitely, some of them perch. So we have had some wells that we installed, and we actually put 5-foot casing. So we are hoping that we capture the flow going up and down for 5 feet. And some of them, even though we installed.
Okay, but they don't move laterally, we don't think, or we don't know. In other words, if
Well-
there's an underground flow,
They're like fissures. Explain.
the Colorado River moves around all over the place. Do underground flows move around like that, or do we know?
No, not
We can-
really like that.
I don't think they move around so much as They're highly variable depending on porosity in the soils and fissures in the limestone coquina. So if you put your well here, the flow may be very slow, and if you put your well 5 feet over here, you may be in slightly different soil conditions where the flow is much greater.
Point of the
and-
question is, have we looked at, is it worth looking at ground penetrating radar to try to map that in advance to help position the wells?
Ground penetrating radar. I'm trying to think here how far. I think the problem is that it's variable temporally. So I'm not sure it will be, it might tell you that, we have the water, the surface of the water is exactly 5 feet from the ground now, but it drops to 9 feet.
Yeah, I'm not a ground radar expert, but I wondered if it would tell us the difference, for instance, of this thing, if I move it, 10 yards one side to the other, do I get more of the flow over here, more of the flow over there? I would think
an interesting-
concentration.
Yeah, I've never seen GPR used that way, but
No.
we can
Ask,
see it.
yeah.
John will use
Usually
it
it's
as an action
underground
item.
utilities.
I have one last question, and it's
Yeah.
it's one of these, let's go off and argue about it for a while, but are we putting wells in, I don't mean this to be disrespectful, but just to get feel-good data, or because it really helps the project somehow? For instance, I was going to ask about breeze
Breeze
swept. To me, breeze swept is a no-brainer, right? If anybody was up there when they were digging into the soil, getting these suckers off septic is, okay? So do we need 5 or 6 wells there proving to us that, yeah, we took them off septic, and gee, the pollutants decreased, right? Is that, I guess the real question is, what is the decision metric being used to decide that, yeah, putting wells at breeze swept or any other location is really going to drive the project forward, help us make good decisions, or is it going to give us feel-good data?
I think there's a couple reasons why we're putting wells in. The 3 wells that we first were only going to do those wells were really designed to calibrate the arc inlet model. And also the city wanted to be able to claim load reductions for their TMDL credit. And for that, they wanted to have real data. They don't want to just have a model that's based on data from Indian River County. So that's reason number 1, right? You are calibrating a model instead of having something that you're making tons of assumptions on. The second reason to add those 2 wells, we thought it would be valuable for the first retrofit to actually inform the future retrofits. What are we expecting to see in terms of change? A very big question here is, can we see a change in 2 years? Because we're monitoring only 2 years after we connect. Does it take 2 years for us to start seeing a difference in the groundwater, or does it take 5? Are we expecting immediate results? A lot of people expect immediate results once you connect.
Got a big sponge there that needs to get flushed out.
Exactly. So that's a very good reason to have this. So this was an obvious subdivision to do this at. It's also highly dense. So, we have a lot of septic tanks in a small area, and we were lucky to have a subdivision with similar kind of density just south of it. And of course, the subdivision south of it thinks that they're going to be retrofitted now. We put wells in it. They keep asking every time we go out there, does it mean that, is it bad right now? Are we going to get connected to sewer? So they wanted to also inform the public that they are doing something, and this is what it looks like. It's improving the lagoon.
So what I think I'm hearing, which would make sense, is, yeah, we put a lot of effort into monitoring here, and we developed sort of a prototypical model that says,
Correct.
now when we go to another concentrated
with similar
conversion,
soils.
we don't need to invest in the wells.
Right.
We've got something we can point to that's
Right.
real data. Thank you.
Right, with similar. Yeah.
I'm all for that.
Okay, John.
I guess the really dumb questions are left to me, but what I didn't hear is the so what. There's nasty stuff in the groundwater, and we want to keep nasty stuff out of the river. Do we have a model that says how much groundwater ends up in the river, what the crosstalk is, what the effect is of nasty stuff in the groundwater in the river? Do we measure that? Do we
Yeah,
have
we have. So the first pie chart that Terry showed had kind of an overall picture of how much of the groundwater ends up affecting the river. So there is a whole.
Pull it up.
Yeah. Pull it up. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I was trying to skip that because I had so much stuff to cover, obviously.
The second slide.
The second slide, yeah.
And actually, actually, that's variable by season, too.
Correct.
At least according to
This
the stuff we've seen previously, in the summertime, with nitrogen accounting for everything in this room, we're getting a lot of nitrogen into the river from natural deposition, but not in the wintertime.
Correct.
Right? So all this is really good, and 2 years from today, we have something to work from, but we certainly don't want to compare January to June.
Correct.
Of this year.
So let me just, these pie charts took a lot of people a lot of years to put together, and Claudia was a big player in that, and so was Dr. Trefry. Sorry, Dr. Listopad and Dr. Trefry. So the green part that is the stormwater loading, is based on many, many, many scientists with decades of research all over Florida and the nation and the world. The groundwater information,
That's just brown.
the brown stuff at the bottom is based on very limited modeling with no reality check in Brevard, with very little validation in the state of Florida. And so these projects that she's monitoring right now are to help calibrate those models that are the basis of this understanding of the so what. Because right now, we're investing over $40 million in septic to sewer in this plan and $20 million in septic upgrades based on, when you dig it up, it's nasty, and so this must be the right thing to do. And we have some models that haven't been proven, haven't been ground truth here, that tell us, yes, it's probably the right thing to do. But this data that she's collecting now will help tell us for sure, yes, and the extent to which there is a benefit from these projects.
I don't quite see that.
Okay.
We may know perfectly what the groundwater characteristics are. What we haven't heard is anything about flow, anything about migration, of either gallons per hoopy or pounds of nasty stuff per unit and so on. And I don't see how knowing in situ here, what ground truth is, translates to this stuff migrating to the river, because there's an isostasy there as far as pressures, et cetera.
So we do have all of that. I worked with John Martin, University of Florida, and Ashok Khan at FIT. We looked at groundwater input to the lagoon.
Sorry, John, you're not mic'd.
Oh,
Yeah, so our audience won't be able to.
We can save the comments, but the point is, we have that.
Yeah, that's
We
it.
do know.
Yeah, we want to get to our panel discussion. We can bring this up.
Just say this.
Yes,
Good question.
we do have that information.
Vinny?
Yeah, Dr. Listopad, I agree with you that the monitoring is so important. And I'm thinking, these wells that you're doing, they're shallow wells, right?
Correct, yes.
The only thing that was running through my head is a lot of people in this county use wells for irrigation, mostly deep wells. But I do know by the stain on some fences that people do have shallow wells. Has there been any reach out to the public to take advantage of their wells? And is it even possible, because of the sampling, to be able to say, well, we'd like to sample some water from your well at a certain amount of time? Because if you could, I'd imagine your number of data points all around the county would go up tremendously.
Right. We can't really use irrigation wells using the procedures, the quality assurance procedures that we're doing. We actually purge the wells and make sure they're under a certain turbidity before we can collect them. We have a casing, so we need to measure the level, so we need 2-inch, 1.5-inch, 2-inch wells at least with casing so we can capture them. However, I do think that irrigation is a separate story, and to be really interesting to see what people are actually putting on their lawns. And we haven't even collected irrigation samples from our reuse subdivision. We're just monitoring the groundwater. So it'd be interesting to do that.
To Vinny's point, though, the wells exist. You might not want to recruit the homeowner to provide the water samples for you, but you could send your qualified personnel to that well site to draw water samples. Most wells are 1.5 to 2 inches. All you need to know then is the depth, and then you can collect your own water. You don't have to pay. You had mentioned, I think 3 times, that it's expensive to put wells in.
It is.
Well,
correct.
There's hundreds of thousands of wells in the county that are already in place. So is that not an option for you?
Maybe not directly, but that might be something
I
that
think
could be looked
it'll be an
into.
added, it might be something an added. It's definitely, we don't have, casing in those wells. So we would have to figure out what depth is it? Is it really important? Does the homeowner really know what depth their irrigation well is at? Most likely not.
If what they're,
I
if what they're
disagree
trying.
with that. I disagree with that.
No.
Homeowner, you pay by the foot to get a well put in. I can tell you my well's 13 feet. I put it in myself.
David, the issue is, at this point, we're trying to set up a scientific test and a standard.
Right.
And if you use your well and my well and his well, we don't have standards, and it can't, so let them get this done. Now, down the road, this may be a great idea for additional non-standardized, if you will, sampling. Two questions. Number one, all this stuff's being done during the rainy season, and as will be discussed, it's significantly different.
Correct.
The other part is, if reuse, in the reuse sample areas, we're getting 10 to 50 parts of nitrogen, and we're dropping 27 parts on it, while we have in the plan to spend, it's only like $9 million to stop that. How about we simply tell the cities, as of right now, you may no longer put any reuse water out that exceeds 10, period. You can't do it.
Oh, that's like another level of treatment.
They have state
That's-
permits that allow them.
Right.
So in other words, as long as they are permitted now to continue to pollute with nitrogen. So we're going to spend the money to stop them from doing something they're allowed to do. Okay, and the other part of this, here, monitoring is critically important, okay? We're talking about septic primarily here, septic to sewer, which is 10% of the money we're going to spend. All the money's being spent in this project on muck. So if we're going to do anything, we need to be knowing now, befores and afters, on muck projects like Turkey Creek and like MIMS, because that's where all of our money's being spent. And I want to know that that money is actually going to be effective. I mean, I think it's pretty simple. If you close the septic tank, crap's not going to go in the river. I don't need to be a scientist. Okay?
Courtney, do you want to respond to?
It is indeed a simple term.
I just wanted to respond to the idea that the reuse, in the cities and the idea of them doing something wrong. I think all of the cities that have reuse water were trying to address a supply problem on the potable water side when they started the reuse process, and they're meeting a state standard. So, I hope it's not being characterized that they're doing something wrong. What they're trying to do, what we're trying to do as a group and as a whole is make it better. And we're starting to recognize the impact of reuse on the lagoon. And when reuse was started, I don't think that was very clear. If we did come up with today and just say, hey, don't put any reuse on the ground until you can meet the standard, you would basically stop golf courses, all of these other areas that would turn around and impact the supply side of the potable water, and that's we'd be creating a whole nother problem. So we are working on it. I think every city that has a reuse plant is working on that issue. So I hope that, when we talk about reuse, that it's not characterized that the cities did something wrong in the first place. The cities were trying to address a problem when they created that.
And I appreciate
And not all the plants really are putting out at the same either. So, there's a way to prioritize this.
But this then is an example of something we talked about the last meeting, which is stuff that really affects the lagoon, that is outside the purview of the trust fund and lagoon plan, but does live at the interface between this department and that department and the county, between the county and the state, and management of these external factors affecting the lagoon health is something that really takes attention. It's not something we can do except talk about it. But maybe it might be nice to hear, for example, a county report from the county manager's level of what we're doing to coordinate and bring together common goals for the health of the river. those we affect with the trust fund, and those that are affected by other things going on inside county activities. And I'm not sure it'd be a very pleasant report the first time I heard it.
Could we get back to our guests
Yes.
and let them, and we can take up this
Yeah.
discussion. These
Yeah,
people have
yeah,
busy
it's-
jobs that they have to get back to, and so.
Right. So, thank you so much. So, Dr. John Trefry, Professor of Chemical Oceanography at FIT. He joined the faculty in '78 after earning his bachelor's degree at Syracuse and his PhD at Texas A&M. John's research is focused on the global cycling of trace elements, including mercury and lead, and nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus. And he has spent much of his career studying extreme environments. He was a co-discoverer of deep-sea hydrothermal vents in the Atlantic Ocean in '85 and spent almost 20 years investigating metal inputs to the ocean from these incredible 750-degree Fahrenheit superheated fluids 2 miles down in the Pacific Atlantic Oceans. Let's see.
That's good enough.
Okay.
Who gave you all that?
Thank you. So I'd like to turn to the less glamorous part of the lagoon, the muck. And in doing so, I'd like to talk about what you're all interested in. How do we measure or monitor the performance of removing muck? And is it going to be successful or not? And everything I'm going to say today is preliminary. This is a work in progress. I've never shown this to anyone except John Windsor and my wife. So this is the first time seeing it. She said I could show it. Okay, so let's look at the monitoring of performance first. So we're removing muck. How do we know we're doing a good job? And I have 3 metrics here. We can track changes in the total volume of muck. Are we decreasing the total volume of muck? By what percentage? Are we decreasing the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that are in the muck as we remove it from the lagoon? And finally, the most complicated one, are we changing the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that's being released from the muck into the lagoon over time as we dredge muck? This is the hard one, and I'm a geochemist. I do have to do at least one chemistry slide, so bear with me. Here we go. It's my picture of the muck. We're talking about releases of nitrogen and phosphorus from muck. It's sometimes called the muck flux. That's just too confusing. We're talking about releases of nitrogen and phosphorus from the muck. So here's a little lagoon, and we have decomposing organic matter. Whether it's a rotting fish or rotting seagrass or something else, it's being decayed by bacteria. As the bacteria decay that black rotting organic matter, it releases 2 things that are of interest to us. Nitrogen in the form of ammonium, bear with the chemistry, and phosphorus in the form of phosphate. These are building up to huge concentrations in the muck, and much like spiking a dye into a glass, they diffuse into the overlying water. And so this is what we're seeing here. So that's this flux or this input of nitrogen and phosphorus from the muck. It is this data alone that drove the whole push for muck being dredged in the lagoon. It can be changed. It doesn't have to be the sole source of the process here. And let's see how the metric goes. Just a quick aside here, some pictures. We measure the release of nitrogen and phosphorus from the muck by collecting cores with divers. We do chemical analysis of the sediments. We also actually put chambers on the seafloor and measure the release of nitrogen and phosphorus into those chambers. These are in sand, not muck. When it's in muck, you can't even see it. And we also do laboratory studies, and we have a variety of new methods to look at this release of nitrogen and phosphorus. Okay, first question is, well, how much muck is out there? Bernhard Riegel from Nova Southeastern University did some studies with acoustics to try and determine the total amount of muck. Our number today for Sebastian Inlet all the way up to Titusville and in the Banana River Lagoon will be somewhere around 5 million cubic yards. An impossible number to picture. So here's how I'd like you to picture it. Picture a football field and put all the muck in the lagoon on it. It's 1,000 yards high, 3,000 feet high, 300 stories high. Or picture 1,000 football fields, each one has a yard. So it's a lot of muck. That's what's out there. That's what we're trying to look at removing, at least some fraction of it. In addition to what Bernhard Riegel's done, we have gone to a variety of places and looked at sediment composition and a variety of different other parameters, such as this site here, just a little bit north of Pineda Causeway. And we go and make very detailed maps and detailed chemical studies, groundwater studies of what's going on in a given area. We know, for example, this area has 70,000 cubic yards, 0.07 million cubic yards of muck, and we know a lot about the chemistry. We know that muck releases more nitrogen and phosphorus in the summer, and more than you could ever want to know. Okay, so if we think about muck removal then in our metrics, we've got 5 million cubic yards of muck to remove. If you determine how much nitrogen and phosphorus is in it, it's about 6,000 tons of nitrogen, 1,500 tons of phosphorus. Put this in perspective, this much nitrogen would take 1.5 million 50-pound bags of fertilizer. That's what's in there. It would take 10 to 15 years of all Brevard County's fertilizer going into the lagoon to get to this number. And then the release from muck is about 640 tons of nitrogen, about 100 tons of phosphorus. That means that 40% of all the nitrogen and phosphorus going into the lagoon is coming out of the muck. The rest is coming off the land and out of the atmosphere. 40% or more. I've been very conservative in my estimates. So that's the big push on muck. Okay, so how are we doing? Let's look at dredging and see what dredging has done in terms of the metrics. The state of Florida funded dredging in Turkey Creek. It finished up in January. If you haven't seen the dredge, the business end is here. Muck was dredged, carried 2 kilometers up the street to a dredge material maintenance area, and dewatered and trucked off to sod farms and other places. Okay, the volume of muck dredged was 140,000 cubic yards. I just gave you 5 million, so I put these in millions. That's 0.14 million. That's about 3% of the muck in the lagoon. So that's what we did in Turkey Creek. Well, let's move on to O'Galley. O'Galley's in the process to be done next year. It's going to add 0.6 million. The dredging of Turkey Creek and O'Galley will remove about 15% of the muck in the lagoon. The nitrogen, that's a metric, interesting. So now we have ways to look at things. Roughly, the nitrogen and phosphorus, although they vary from deposit to deposit, in this case, there's a little bit more nitrogen and phosphorus in these 2 creeks. So we're actually saying we removed about 17% of the nitrogen and phosphorus by dredging these 2 creeks. So interesting start. Again, both O'Galley and Turkey Creek were funded by the state of Florida. All right, now what about releases of muck? So this one you got to watch carefully. The releases of muck from Turkey Creek prior to dredging were about 7 tons of nitrogen, 2 tons of phosphorus. After dredging, it's down by about 50%. Complicated number, read one of our reports to get to that 50%. O'Galley, I just multiplied it up by the number of tons that are there, but 10 tons of nitrogen, 3 tons of phosphorus, and we'll guess it maybe decreases by 50%. Why only 50%? That can be question and answer. So of the 640 tons of nitrogen that we say are being released every year and 100 tons of phosphorus, we've decreased the flux by about 2%. Not 15%, not 17%. The flux only changed by 2%. The reason is we dredged really thick deposits with a small surface area. So what rules in releasing nitrogen and phosphorus is the amount of surface area that you dredge. So we removed a lot of muck, but we made a smaller change in the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that's coming into the lagoon. And we also had some slumping back into these creeks. These creeks are harder to dredge. So all this opens the bigger question about, one more thing. This is preliminary. This is preliminary. I will not stand too far behind this, but this is preliminary. So now we're trying hard to optimize our choices of site to dredge. Turkey Creek and O'Galley were done more from expediency of permitting and other issues to try to spend the state money. And so I think it's a valuable exercise, but moving forward, we need to decide whether that's the way to go doing creeks. So there are a number of things to consider. I go for the larger surface area places. Going to open up more ground for biota, less ground for diffusion of ions out of the water. We need to go places where there's a good chance for biological recovery. And I think this is an important part of the overall story. And I suggest we go to places that I call ground zero for algae blooms, which means we need to get up in the Banana River and move along those areas and move there. And then finally, we need to go to places where the fluxes of nitrogen and phosphorus are large, and to get all these parameters together. So the dream part of the tenure of local funding is we've got time to plan and work out the right places to go. We get time to get the right permits, the permits that are hard. And we can now, I think, take a giant step forward from what we've learned from the state funding and do this well. My number one choice for Indian River Lagoon muck dredging is 520 Causeway to Pineda Causeway in the Indian River Lagoon. And I won't make the case for that right now, but I think that's where I would start. I think that's a win-win situation for all the things that we're looking at. All right. Last topic is the hardest one. So I've given you some metrics for measuring performance of muck removal. How do we measure success? Everybody has a different way. I hope you're all successful in the way you hope to be successful. But I listed a couple of things on here. My neighbor would consider success of the lagoon is the snookerback. I have other people I know who say, just no more fish kills, please. That would be success. Or some may say, let's get the seagrass back. I love the seagrass beds and all the things, the sea urchins and so forth. And some would say, where's the clams? Where are the oysters? That would be success. And yet some people would say, hey, my property values are up. That's success. And others might say more tourism. Some people will consider that success. I would not. But success is a hard thing. So we are working on, in our terms of how do you optimize the choices of sites to dredge or remove muck, or should we just leave some in some places? I don't think we should touch any muck in Mosquito Lagoon. Just let it sit there. It's okay. And so we have a lot of decisions to make, and this is the kind of picture I'm trying to leave with you. So, to me, the real success is, if we stop the damn muck from coming in. We got to do that first. We got to keep working on that. And I'm so pleased that the major steps have been made in that regard. No direct runoff to the lagoon. It has to stop somewhere. It has to be behind a dam. It has to be in a pond, a baffle box, somewhere. No direct runoff to the lagoon. And I have a lot more personal impacts on all of that. Anyway, that's my big picture. I must thank the funding agencies that have supported us. I've received funding for many years from the St. Johns River Water Management District. Chuck Jacoby and Rex Ellis have been great with that. We received money at FIT from the state of Florida through the Department of Environmental Protection, and our three great colleagues here at Brevard County have been wonderful in helping us use that money as well as we could. I also have money now to look at aeration of muck from the National Estuary Program. And this is not preliminary, these are enduring to me. Likewise, I have a lot of great colleagues at FIT around the state and around the world. I just listed some local ones here. John Windsor is my confidant. I let him see these slides before you. And I thank him, and I thank all of you for taking the time and interest that you've done to do here, and you indeed are also enduring.
Thank you. So a couple questions before we move to the panel. We'll have a break and then we'll go to the panel after.
Please, go ahead.
Sorry. Your map of the muck in the Indian Banana River Lagoon, very quickly I seem to find pockets where the causeways were, but I also saw muck and open water. Could you comment on how the causeways, I've always treated the causeways as a bad idea, the earth dams, turning the lagoon into a series of lakes, kind of. But your map, showing muck and open water, nowhere near a causeway, maybe deflates my issue with causeways. I want to get your opinion on that.
Can we see the map again?
Okay, so first of all, I only showed you one very small part of the lagoon. It only went from the 520 Causeway to Pineda Causeway, so there's a lot above and below. So that was a very small picture of the whole lagoon. But the simple statement is this. Muck is found where the water is deeper. It's that simple. So it's in the intercoastal waterway everywhere. It's in the little channels that go into the intercoastal waterway, and it's in deeper places. So, for example, between Rockledge and Cocoa on the west side, there's a deeper pocket there, 3 meters of water, and it's built up muck there. There's muck in every single borrow pit next to every causeway. If maybe the borrow pits were a good thing. They were used to get the sand and soil and gravel to make the causeway, but muck has gone in there. Every one of those is filled to the brim. It's just absolutely amazing. Yes, transport has been certainly impeded by the causeways. They weren't the best thing to do. Yet some bridges have been created to let some flow go through. That's a long issue, but depth is where the muck is.
Thank you.
John.
How good is our lagoon plan?
Pardon?
How good is our lagoon plan?
I don't know and you don't know. We got to kind of move along. We just got to know. I mean, it's a great start. It's a great start. We don't know. We don't know. That's why the one best thing about this lagoon plan, and you and everyone else, is we can modify it. So everything that you're seeing, all the data you've seen presented now, weren't funded at all. We don't have any money from this plan. We don't plan to. This now, we've got to learn from what we do to make changes. Maybe dredging muck isn't that high a priority. I'm the muck person. Maybe groundwater is everything. I'm not sure septic tanks are that important, but that's a personal bias. we don't have all the answers yet. And so we've got to work really hard and modify it as it goes along. And it's a work in progress. And if we just follow the path as it says there, we may not be successful. We've got to constantly have metrics as we go along. I'm a little concerned there's not enough scientific involvement in determining whether things are working out well or not. And I'm going to be sitting on a beach retired before that gets going too far along, perhaps. But we've got to make sure we're doing the right thing, and I get concerned about that.
Terry.
So muck may not be the most glamorous topic, but muck is well served by having you as its spokesman. Two quick points. To the distribution of muck. You mentioned the point. We got to stop the influx, right? There are thousands of outflows bringing silt into the lagoon. They're not just at the causeways. They're all up and down the waterway, and that needs to stop. Right. I mean, I'm with you. We need to put an end to that.
So that's where we reach out to the citizens. I mean, you can't go in any canal has 20 outfalls.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That's where the action needs to be.
Tell me about it. I took some students up the Ogallie River, right, trying to do some muck samples, and there were places where a pontoon boat could not get into the canal. It was so choked with muck. Is there any truth to the rumor that Tampa Bay has had some success in sort of natural reclamation of muck? In other words, they didn't do any of these mediations, but natural aeration caused the muck concentrations to reduce. Fact or fiction?
Okay, that's a half-hour answer to that story. The quick answer is, bear in mind that the major decrease in nutrient inputs into Tampa Bay was from point sources, sewage treatment plants and all that sort of thing. We don't have that problem anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
They're having a hard time decreasing the diverse inputs that we are here fighting. So you have to be careful in comparing apples and oranges there. Muck does not decompose. Muck is no more ever in the lagoon than 30% organic matter. That's the most that can decompose is 30%, 10 to 30%. The rest is fine-grained clays, much of which came washing out of your sod. All of you who have St. Augustine grass, raise your hand and kick yourself. I mean, you did the wrong thing. And so I'm not sure I'm answering your question. I think that there's a little bit of apples and oranges between them. They also have flow. They get tidal flow. They got this great flow.
Yeah, I understand all that, but given those circumstances,
they have not had any great luck in decomposing muck. It's just they only have it in one little spot way up into the north there. So they don't have a lot of muck.
Okay.
We're mucked up.
Okay. And go ahead, John.
This is very new to me. Thank you for all your work. And I think John
I'll pass the hat.
Yeah, I'll be happy to. John brought this up at a previous meeting, and I think you just demonstrated it in some preliminary information here. It's more about surface than about depth. And so as we consider what muck projects to fund, I really don't care about pulling 10 feet of muck out of a deep hole. I really care about pulling 100 square feet of surface area, even if it's a foot thick. That may be more effective. Am I capturing that right?
I think I gave you that flavor, sure. And so I tend to have said that for the last 30 years. There is a distinction, though. All the muck that sits in Ogallie and all the muck that sits in Turkey Creek washes out during storms. So the fact that we sort of cleaned out the filter there, it's been really important to do that. So I think that was a good thing to do. I don't think we're going to change significantly the flux of nitrogen and phosphorus out of that site, but that site wasn't an important source of fluxes or releases of nitrogen and phosphorus. So yes, I vote the big surface area things, but it's not a simple answer. A lot of things go into it. It's not just surface area, but I think that's one of the top 5 criteria.
Okay, and I know you don't want to argue right now for the 520 to Pineda start point, but just a thumbnail sketch on why you were thinking in that direction. Is it the depth? Is it the surface area?
The first thing is we can get it all. So when you go into Turkey Creek or you go into O'Galley, you stop at the pier. They're docks.
Yeah.
And we only got a fraction of, not all of the muck in those places. We are limited by where we can dredge. We can't tear people's walls down and docks down. We can go along from the Pineda Causeway all the way almost to Cocoa and just go clean it all out. And in some cases, the new depth isn't going to be so bad. We're not going to take out tons of it. We only take out this much. So we're going to have an area that biologically might really come back. And there aren't major outfalls into that area. There are many, many little ones, but there aren't major. I don't think it's going to fill up that fast. And these are just the process. So we are now, as part of working with Brevard County, going through the process. How do we pick what places to do?
Okay.
And
Yeah, well, I asked about that specifically because I understood that was much later. In the plan, we had identified to do that like in year 8 or something.
Well, permitting is the issue, right? Permitting, we need to get the open lagoon to be open territory for dredging.
Okay.
And there's discussion on that, which got delayed because of the, okay.
Okay, are we okay to, can we take a 5-minute break? And that would, so we'll be back here at 10:10 with our panel. Today.
That's the truth. You're up in Cocoa, though. You don't have water, right? I know, yeah, but Cocoa water system. You do have water.
Okay, if our panelists can take their seats.
Okay. You're good otherwise. Good.
Taking 2 showers.
Hey, you smell good.
Yeah, well, thank you. You're not downwind.
Okay, so we'll start with questions from the Oversight Committee, and then we'll open it up to a few from the audience as well.
Let me try one for Virginia and Dr. Truffle and I guess the panel. Excellent comments about the quality of our lagoon plan. What is the process for us to continually improve it? I mean, we're supposed to make advice once a year, recommendations, but we're all amateurs in this game. Is there a mechanism? Are there dollars? Are there inputs and reassessments? Is Tetra Tech still involved, et cetera? How do we get to this higher goodness in the lagoon plan on a regular annual basis?
So my intent was that we would monitor the performance of the first projects that get implemented, and we would report those performance measurements to you all. And based on those, we would have a discussion about, do we need to do more of these? Do we need to do less of these? Or do we do the same amount, but we tweak where we do them, how we do them? And that is all part of the discussion that goes into the annual updates, which, yes, Tetra Tech helps us prepare annually.
Well, it strikes me we need some input, some expert input as well. And just from a system viewpoint, it seems to me that maybe there's a point, and it smells to me like it's 3 years in, that we really take a hard look at taking a round turn, perhaps significant adjustments based on 3 years information to carry us forward. It's got to do with dollars and budgets and so on. But I think that Tetra Tech did a marvelous job with lots of inputs. They could do a more marvelous job with 3 years of experience, I think. And that's something I'd hope to see as a proposal from your side rather than us telling you. I'm just trying to plant
Stephanie?
thoughts in your mind.
And kind of from that viewpoint, and we've talked about this before, we're kind of waiting for organizations to bring us projects. And so to Dr. Trefry's point, if we've identified that this is an area that we think could have significant impact, and no one's coming to us with a project, how do we address that? How do we get somebody to take up some of these areas? You know that you've got areas, of infill that are coming in to the lagoon, and maybe nobody is addressing those. No city, no municipality, no one's coming to us with a project to stop that outflow. So how do we address that when we know that there are areas that could have significant impact if we could get somebody to take that up and give us a project?
So can I?
So the plan includes dozens of stormwater treatment projects in specific basins. And so those were selected based on previous research and some of Dr. Listopad's modeling on, where are those worst basins that are contributing pollution to the lagoon. And so those are the projects that will proceed following as best we can from highest priority to lowest priority, unless cities or other partners propose substitution projects. So I wouldn't say that we are waiting for people to offer substitutions in those areas. We've already identified those areas, and they are in the plan, and we are moving forward on that.
I just wanted to add to Stephanie's point, because it is something I was going to talk about when we talk about communications. We have, and I know this isn't panel, sorry guys, you did so well earlier, but we'll get back to it, I promise. But we have the training coming up in October, and I wanted to put, or help with the county put a video together that would say, these are the type of projects that we encourage. And at any time down the road, if we feel there's an area that's not, then we can put a little infomercial together and say, here's the date, start thinking about this now, there are funds available, and then shoot it out through our social media and our webpage, and then I'm sure all the other lagoon organizations that are always represented will push it out as well. So I think the hardest part is us or natural resources figuring out what is that area that we want, and what are what type of rules we're going to set for that area, dollars, and then we can get that word out.
Okay. Now questions for our panel.
Matter of curiosity, everybody on the panel, has anybody ever done this before? I mean, we've got Metro in Seattle, and we got Chesapeake Bay, and we got Tampa and so on, but aren't we kind of sui generis taking this on? It'd be wonderful to look around and find a template and say, boy, if we did all this, it'd be wonderful, but Dr. Trefry?
So I think Puget Sound would be great.
There's the mic.
Use the mic,
please.
Thank you. I have not been involved in this kind of work. I'm not sure about the others. I do think Puget Sound would be a great model, for example. That's probably the most similar to what we have here. And so I think that we might want to bring some people on as advisors from a place like Puget Sound. It's hard to know. I do agree with you, and I know that the county has gone and sought advice from other people. We've invited other people here to give us their input. So we can't do this ourselves. We need outside advice and help, if that's what you're asking. I agree completely.
There was at one time, and I'll use the term muck, though it was primarily related to chicken farming in the Delmarva Peninsula, the Aswoman Bay, in that area. And the rivers had 3 to 6 feet of muck. The first thing that was done was to stop the sources. Back to your point, and I think what we all want to do is stop what's going into the river. And then over a period of about 20 years, without any effort, mechanical or otherwise, from people, the river in and of itself cleaned up, and sandy bottom, fish, etc. So there is examples where the removal of muck, first by stopping it, and then it just removed itself through tidal flow, etc., and the rivers restored themselves. And it's that, to me, that's encouraging, that if we can stop the inflow of the causes of muck into the lagoon and then do some removal, we're on the right track.
Okay. And our panelists agree with that?
Yes and no. First of all, we need to remind ourselves that muck, as defined for the Indian River Lagoon, is only 10 to 30% decayable organic matter. There'll still be a large residue left. I'm not sure we're ever going to stop all organic matter from coming in. That may be an unrealistic goal. But we're not like any sort of chicken feed or something like that, that it can be completely decomposed. We're in a different world. We also aren't going to get much help from the ocean unless we start to put tubes under the barrier island or something like that. So we are rather unique in many ways, and I think we need to adjust to that and try and make adjustments to the fact that we have a rather unique situation.
Well, I have a question. Well, I guess for Dr. Listopad. In terms of the excess nutrients and the water reuse, and maybe Courtney can talk about this as well, but is there anything in the short term that we can do, reduce that just by educating people to, I guess, water less? But the systems are established. I know in cocoa, at least, they actually have to release water from time to time because they have too much reused water, reclaimed water.
I can talk a little bit specifically about that community. That community not only isn't aware, I mean, they're not aware at all that there's nutrients in the water. They actually fertilize pretty much all the time. Every time I've been there, it's been multiple services fertilizing. So I think I try to explain to the homeowners association, you really probably don't need to fertilize. You have nutrients in the water, and they were completely shocked because it actually saves them money. So that's their first correlation. Oh, we don't need to hire all this? Like, no, I don't think. After I looked at 12 milligrams of nitrate, so some of their grass is actually burned from overusing. So that's something that could definitely be done. Educating the subdivisions, the communities that are on reuse, that their reuse is providing the nutrients they need, and to be simple enough to at least sample a few of their irrigation water, and when it's irrigating, and grab it and take to the lab and see how much nitrogen is really providing. In this case, it don't need to fertilize at all, but they're still doing so. So I don't think there's been any education, at least from to the homeowners association. We went to a meeting, and they had never been informed how often they get irrigation. They don't know what is in their water. So I think that needs to happen, because at least we don't need to be putting fertilizer on top of this high level of nutrients. I would think there'll be something simple. Maybe that's something that could be done standard across, identifying all the subdivisions on reuse and trying to get social media input out there. I think they'll be, happy about that. I mean, it cuts costs, if nothing else, and effort.
Okay. Do you have anything to add, Courtney? Because, I mean, what strikes me is that the reclaimed water, that was progress in terms of overall water management. So when we're looking at the lagoon, we've got to look at overall water management too.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think I agree with Dr. Listopad. We could say that about the same thing about well water use on beachside, because we've done tests on our wells, and they're very high in nutrients. And I tell people, you could just water your grass. You do not need to put fertilizer on your grass. It has plenty in there. And we have data to back that up. So, I think that's a great point, is to start educating people that when you're using this type of source for irrigation, there's no need to fertilize, because we have plenty of nutrients in that source.
We've got $125K for 5 years on fertilizer education. How is that being packaged to carry this kind of message forward, Virginia?
We're working on the request for proposal package right now. We hope to get that, out there on the street in the next month or two, and see, what sort of proposals the community submits. But that, that would be a great part of a proposal. Yeah.
And that money is level loaded over 5 years. It strikes me that wait until the 5th year to say, really pay attention to it may not be near as effective as left loading the funding. And I think that's something we may want to consider in our proposal to the commission next year. It's peanuts. We're getting excess revenue because the economy's doing okay, and I think we might be able to lump that 125K 2-3 layers deep the first year and really hit it with grand exuberance to get this message out. Big impact.
Could I add one thing about reclaimed water? I think reclaimed water is a step forward. And I think when it's used on, say, the Crane Creek Golf Course, hardly any of it goes into Crane Creek. The problem is when it runs off into the street and people, 50% of their water on their lawn is ending up in the street and going down into the runoff. And so that's really where we need to have the reclaimed water people get their act together and not water the street with reclaimed water. Or any water, any irrigation water. Just use the right length of irrigation thing so you water only 5 feet if you have 5 feet, not water the whole street.
The folks that were here, I think from UF, that have when we had the president, okay. Could we talk to them about how funding might be used for this kind of education for both cities, the Reclaim Water Group, and for the general public? Because to the doctor's point, when you talk to your neighbors about why you don't fertilize in the summer, because you're getting all the nitrogen that you need, they go, God, that just saved me a weekend, that just saved me a trip to the store, it just saved me the money, and my lawn looks great. It's just a matter of people understanding that you don't need. I was unaware that using well water, and so it may be that we can have a little testing where people could test their well water, and if it turned green, it says you don't need to fertilize. And something as simple as that would be educational.
Right, and this is a very target audience. We know the address of everyone that has, reclaimed water for their yards. So, we could really campaign specifically.
But I think she just said that if I'm pulling out of my well,
True.
If my well is doing that, then I don't ever need, I mean, I fertilize anyway, but I would never need to fertilize if I'm using well water or David's new 13-footer.
So is that a simple test to see if my rabbit dies?
We sent off ours to a company, so I don't know whether there's and they may be able to answer that, whether there's a simple test that you can use at home.
Yeah, it's going to have detection limits, so that's always the problem. But I would think that this is something that could be done well. I like the idea of people just being able to have their water sampled. That's a great idea. If we could have test kits like you do for your swimming pool.
Right.
It's not impossible, and it's not expensive. There'd just be a lower limit to which you can detect it.
That doesn't need to be scientific accuracy, right?
Absolutely not. That's right.
Red, green, and yellow, that's it.
Right.
So this is a great something to move forward with. I think we should do this. I have not tested my own sprinkler, I'm embarrassed to say. I do hundreds of analyses, I've never done my own.
We'll have to look at what the detection limits are for those little kits that are available, because they may not be low enough for what we need to measure. But if they are, that would be fantastic.
Like a kit, the cost per those kits. I mean, any aquarium store or pool store, you can just see them all lined up. So it's just a matter of accuracy, as if it's appropriate for what we're dealing with.
Well, you could probably, for the volume we're talking about, if somebody were a part of their campaign, they could have somebody develop something specifically.
It's true.
We could take a couple of questions from the audience. Is there, unless we've got, John, did you have your hand?
I did have a question for John, and it has to do with our dashboard, and I'm a big fan of having things out on the dashboard, publicly accessible, touting the successes. Great presentation on the results from Results Today, Turkey Creek, and Crane Creek, but depending on the story you want to tell, I either want to put up 15 to 17%, or I want to put up 1 or 2%. And the difference, explaining the difference, is not something that's going to fare well on a public website trying to explain to Joe Sixpack how this works. What advice would you give us as to what we should or should not put on the dashboard?
Well, for me, I don't think we should rush to judgment. I think the idea of waiting a couple years before we put some of these results on there, it's just too early in the process to try and say we're having success. And I agree with you that there's a whole other metric I didn't even talk about. The water quality in Turkey Creek afterwards. I would have bored it all to death. I mean, that's the real thing. And then what about the organisms? Did they come back? Does someone live there now? So it goes on and on and on and on and on. And it's worth thinking about. And I haven't seen your dashboard, I'm sorry to say, but I do think if we could get some results out there, that would make people feel good. I don't have an answer, but I will think about it.
And if I may just add to, we talked a lot about success in the process. We're going to see some bumps in the road. We're going to see some failure. We're going to see good projects that are going to come up short. And it's not, well, just scrap that. It's why did it fail? And if it didn't work there, will it work better over here, right? So we're going to see a lot of that, or some of that as well. So just so that everybody understands that.
Okay. Okay, we have one question there.
Craig Wallace, Satellite Beach. Dr. Trefry, you brought up the input to the lagoon, to the muck from sod. I would ask if there's anything being done about, one, educating people as to what that, because I didn't know it until I took one of your classes, and two, is there anything we can do about banning St. Augustine sod or whatever we can do? I mean, are we looking at that at all?
Okay, so first of all, St. Augustine sod has on the order of 3 to 5% fine-grained clay. It's a clay that's part of where sod forms. It's not a lot. Bahia has hardly anything. So if you multiply just a few percent of all the sod that's been put down, you can account for quite a bit of the silt and clay that are in the muck in the lagoon. As far as orchestrating people to change away from St. Augustine, that's beyond my skill set. But I do think it would be a great idea. I really do. I have watched St. Augustine go down in a house next to the lagoon, and the first rainstorm, it looks like the Mississippi River flowing out of that house. So there's just no doubt and chemically, we can track the type of material that's in it. The sod is a source. It's one of the sources. I still have sod. I can't say anything.
And during the storm that we just had, as the water rose in the northern ends of the lagoon, and primarily wind-driven, it went over seawalls in a lot of areas, and there is already significant erosion. And you can see it in the color of the water. Yeah, it happened overnight. So.
Okay. George, you had your hand up. Do you have something specific for our panelists? Because we will have public comments at the end of our agenda.
You asked about public comments.
Specifically for our panelists. Okay, good.
George Rosenfield. Dr. Trefry talked about the deep muck and the shallow muck and the area muck. And the gentleman over here summed it up between digging holes in the muck and deep muck and removing the surface muck of large surfaces. Both have to be removed. I didn't understand we were just digging holes in the muck, 10, 12 foot of muck in the Indian River, in the O'Galley River, and Spring Creek, and all these other creeks. But if you don't remove the deep muck, it's going to travel into the, if you don't remove it, it's going to travel into the areas of the lagoon anyway, because the current will bring it down into the lagoon. So both have to be done, and you've got to stop the runoff. And we've talked about this for years now, stopping the runoff and adding to the lagoon problems. And all three have to be done. Now, who sets the priorities? But I understand we're supposed to be taking up all the muck out of the O'Galley River and starting at one one end at the outfall and just working upstream, taking it all out. I didn't understand we were digging holes in it, as it was said. So it has to be, the muck has to be removed, especially, and we need the seagrasses, so it has to be removed in areas so the seagrasses grow back.
Yeah.
So this is what.
I think the
but this
plan does not does not have the ability to remove all the muck, but a percentage, and have that prioritized.
Yeah, and that's up to our head of the operation.
So I'm not digging holes in muck. I'm not watching people dig holes in muck either. The muck is being removed. The problem in Turkey Creek in O'Galley Harbor is you can't get close to the seawalls, you can't get under docks, and unless you have some technique to clean that out, it's all going to slump back in again. It's going to keep stuff from going out in the lagoon. That's the main saving grace of dredging creeks. But to get it all out, we're going to have to go to new technology that basically vacuums it. And we're going to have to confirm to people that their seawall isn't going to fall down, or their dock's not going to do this. So,
well, the people know that, especially along the O'Galley River. When you go up the O'Galley River, then you get the Spring Creek coming down into the O'Galley River. The people there want all that muck removed. And eventually it will be. That's why we're understanding of it.
Okay.
Within the limits of the dredging equipment.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. And Vinny, I think we have a communications presentation today, or just an update?
Just an update, yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know if some of you might have caught, I'm trying to figure the times now, maybe 3 weeks ago, the last week kind of feels like a couple months. The county is in the process of converting the look of their website to a different look, a different feel, something that works better with mobile devices. And the system that they have, it's a content management system where basically every piece of text that's on a website exists in a bucket. And what they have to do is they have to transfer all those buckets for every website in the county over to this new system. So what they have asked is they've asked that none of those websites get updated because that migration process is complicated. So what they started doing, I don't know if you caught it, what I was saying 3 weeks ago, I went to the website to look, and the new design was up there, the new layout was up there. I went back a couple days ago and today, and it's not up there. So obviously they either switched back, there was an issue, I'm sure Irma had something to do possibly with it. So the updates on the website are on hold until the county finishes their migration. They are aware that we have a training coming up in October, and we have asked them to get the application for the application that we use to submit substitute projects to be online. So they are aware that we would like to have that up and available by the date of the training. So when we do the training, we can actually walk them through how that system will take place. Okay. So as far as the website and the dashboard goes, there aren't any updates there. There is, as Virginia gave in her status and progress update, the fifth person who they're looking to hire and who they almost have. They got the net out and they're swimming around in the net. That will be the person that will be the Facebook administrator, for lack of a better term. And once that's done, then we can create the Facebook page. And we have some really cool audio PSAs that Walker sent me and a whole bunch of other people. So we'll be able to shoot out some really cool content and help starting to build this audience that we've been talking about. Well, how do we get information out to these people? And once you create a channel and people know information is coming, then they'll look for it. So that's a good thing. So once we get that position official, we'll go ahead and create our Facebook page, and that will allow us to really be able to reach out and for all of us to share and push out even farther the information that we're trying to go over. So those are the two items. The third one, well, I guess there's four items. The third one, I had a conversation with a gentleman in the community, again, about our dashboard, just kind of as Terry asked Dr. Trefry about our dashboard, and the conversation that was brought up was there's no story to tell about water quality. And the reason I bring this up is, again, I just want to make sure that we're all in agreement on what we're doing and how we're presenting our story. And the conversation that we had was the same conversation Dr. Trefry put up, where what measures success, and what is water quality, and which area is the water quality being done. If we tell somebody the water quality is improved and in some area it isn't, there's different information being sent. So the conversation that I had with the gentleman was, the information our dashboard displays is our nitrogen, our phosphorus, our money, things that were in the plan, things that are facts and are undeniable, and can't be fake news, or at least we have a hard time being fake news. I won't go there, John. But again, I do think the conversation that we had, I said, 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road, something that we could use as a measurement to tell more of a story would be maybe the length of algal blooms, the distance between when they happen, or the fish kills if they happen. We can start developing a story, something that's undeniable, once we get a little bit farther out. But I know personally, my opinion, I'm happy with our numbers and the information we're putting up there, because there's really no way that you can say this isn't being done or this can't be done. But that is a conversation that I had, and I want to present any conversations I have of substance with you guys to make sure that everyone feels that we're still on the same, that we're on the good path. And then the final thing, again, goes to some of the talk we've had today about education. John talked about maybe front-loading some of those dollars on our education fertilizer. I do think when it comes to communication, if you can build a channel and build content out front, that is a bulk of the work. And then a lot of it can trickle in and can flow, but you've got to have that content and that schedule up front for people to be interested in. So that might be something we want to do. The other thing is, again, is how reaching out to the community. We do, once we get that Facebook page, maybe we'll wait. When's the training, Virginia, again?
October 12th.
October 12th. So the training will take place before we meet again next month. So I'm not sure if there is a message that we wanted to push out maybe with our municipalities, if there's any area that we don't feel that we're covering or that have been covered, that we want to push out. That was a question I wanted to present to you guys to see if there is a discussion. And again, after the training, the focus is to capture the training either in a video for the entire presentation or actually have some sort of online instructional for the form. So if we don't have that information out for the training next month, we can always next month say, well, why don't we get together a little package together and push this out for areas that we feel are lacking or that we'd want to see, or specific, maybe a little bit more directional guidelines. I know Virginia said she's working on the RFP for the education, the fertilizer. Maybe we can see some preliminary stuff on that next month, make sure it's covering the areas that we want, and then really push that out.
I see John thinking over there.
With that in mind, and what Courtney talked about earlier, it's not a lot of money, but if a city were to come up with a plan that would educate folks who were on reclaimed water very specifically, that would be something that we could consider within that $125,000, isn't it? So maybe people should look toward things beyond what just filling holes in the ground.
I agree.
Does that make sense?
I think it's a great project. I think putting that on the cities, especially at this time, might be a little too much. But I do think, and I'll plug them. I don't know, Keep Brevard Beautiful. I like them. Or sure. MRC or some community, some NGO that was interested. And I think that also it's better. It's more. I think it would be better if it was above the cities and not that it's a structure or a hierarchical tree. But then you go from a municipality to municipality with a different message. Maybe if there was a county-wide message, here's our kit with a picture of the Indian River Lagoon. Put this in your sprinkler system. Check it out. Anything that we can do to give to residents, it's an action that they can take. They want to help, and if we can encourage and give them the ability of simple help, I think it's great. So that would be something I think an NGO would be great at doing. And maybe next month or over the break, I can kind of draw some packages together. Maybe people can think, and we can have a larger discussion at the next meeting if there's certain areas that we want to push out to.
Stephanie.
The Space Coast League of Cities could easily facilitate getting the message out to each of the municipalities. And so if you have a standard message to say your reuse water provides all the fertilizer that you need, you don't need any more fertilizer, there's no reason why the individual municipalities could not send that out. Because as Lorraine said, they know who their reuse customers are. They're getting bills, some kind of bill from the city. That message can be attached to those notices. And so it's very easy for that information to get out. The Space Coast League of Cities has been instrumental in getting this committee formed, and they're very supportive. And so it would not be difficult at all to get that message to them, and then from them out. Once we draft that message, if we have a standard message that we want to go out, we can easily get that message out to the reuse customers.
I do think, I know John's got a message. I think getting messages out are good. Giving people activities to actually enforce that message is even better. Because there is just so many messages that are flying out there that if you have, let's say you've got a street full of 10 houses, and if even 5 of those houses have a kit and they're going out in their yard, their other neighbors are going to be like, what are they doing? Oh, they're testing their water? Well, I want to test my water. So actions actually can reinforce messages. So I think that would be good. And again, I also do think, I think the League of Cities would be great as a conduit to get it out. I think if it came from a scientific or a quote-unquote Lagoon professional, that might have a little bit more, not weight, but substance behind it, where people can go back and look. I know Dr. Windsor may have an opinion on that one way or another. We can put his face on it, and it says Dr. Windsor. John says, and there, we're done. Piece of
I was
cake.
characterized a little earlier as being an amateur.
We
were all characterized as being amateurs in this restoration arena.
Yeah.
And I'm not, but
Except, we get all the other areas.
We are.
Yeah, I am.
not everybody on the committee. I wouldn't characterize everybody as being an amateur. I think that having somebody that's recognized in the community as being a responsible agency, something like MRC or Keep Brevard Beautiful, one of those I think is far better than having somebody who might be considered to be remote, like some of the academics are characterized in the community as being those scientists, all they're interested in is research. And so I think that going with one of those is probably a better approach. And quite frankly, most academics are trying to get enough funding to keep their students supported, and going for a couple of $100s here and there is a total waste of their time. People that are working on real problems in the lagoon are trying to get hundreds of thousands of dollars to support their projects, not a few $1,000s. And so sometimes you would think people would want to jump in on stuff like that. And again, over the years, I've been very fortunate. FIT has always given me the freedom to do what I wanted to do. And so I was able to jump in on some of those little projects to help out where I could at no charge. But, I think the NGOs are the best way to go with that.
Okay.
On communications, I have a comment.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do is extend a conversation I had with Vinnie and also with Dwayne DeFries after the last meeting. We should recognize what we're doing in the informational part of these meetings that we've just gone through. We are doing 2 things. One, we're getting a survey course on lagoon studies. And secondly, we are creating content in bite-sized modules. Vinnie says it's fairly easy to capture, since we've got videos, to capture these in packages. And I think that they then become community resources for STEM studies in charter schools and Brevard Public Schools, presentation materials for advocacy groups, MRC, Friends of the Thousand Islands, etc. And this, I think, should be part of our communication strategy, to grab a hold of each of these bite-sized things, not saying, here's a module on fertilizer, but rather, here are 4 modules on fertilizer that you then deal with as you see fit inside the needs that you have. Don't know how to organize it. The easiest way to organize it is say Vinnie will do it, but I think that's something we need to pay attention to. It's free. This is free education, and it is as encyclopedic as anything I've seen on lagoon information.
John, real quick, before you, and I'll let you go. What John and I talked about, so all these panels and presentations we have are captured, and they're there. The problem is there are 3.5-hour meetings, and if somebody wants to come in and get just a link on groundwater, or just a link on this, 3.5 hours to sit through is quite a task. So I think if, again, maybe somebody in the community or somebody wanted to answer the RFP for communication money, who would sit through and comb and say, we're going to edit this and take this section out and take this section out, and then it goes on our dashboard or it goes on our Facebook page. I think it's great. Like John said, it was a great idea. Educational pieces for our classrooms that could sit down and stream this as well. So I think, again, that might be something that a videographer or somebody in the industry and the community says, here's a proposal. I'll cut those bad boys up and put some music to them and some flair, and we're good to go.
Okay.
Sorry, John.
So thank you.
Okay.
I wanted to show from our last, I'm learning so much from these, from our last thing. And I got the link from my county commissioner, and I went on and I had to listen to us for hours to get to like 95 minutes in just to see the little 10-minute presentation that I wanted to show my neighbors. And there's no easy way. We have all that information. I don't care if county staff does it and we have to do it out of this budget, but if we put those little 10-minute presentations onto our dashboard site, link, et cetera, I think it would be incredibly helpful for people, because right now it's impossible to find them, but we have them. So thank you. Thanks for bringing that up.
I think it would be great to have county staff again. I think the more outside people we engage in this process, I think the louder our voice is. So while county staff is more than able and eligible to do it, I think it might be nice if we got somebody outside and they would reach into their circles of influence and just continue from there. But wherever, it was a great idea John brought up, and I think it's
Okay. Well, speaking of 3.5-hour meetings, go ahead. And
Yeah,
then
to that
then
point,
we're going to move on.
not as sweeping as this, but I'd taken the liberty of asking Carol if she could get the videos posted separately where we could get to them with an MP3 or whatever kind of viewer to do an accelerated playback, right? I tried to catch up on the meetings that I missed. It is painful. And what's on the website, if you try to fast forward it, you end up, I skip the important part and I come back to John's comment, right? And I skip again and I come back to John's comment. So I've asked her for that. I don't know if that's doable or not. It doesn't really solve the thing that you're talking about, which is, editing and presenting them. But it would sure help us if we miss a meeting to get, back in sync.
I would just to Terry, there is, and I don't know how wide it's known, but the Brevard County's Facebook page takes the videos that are broadcast on the website and puts them on their Facebook page. So these videos are also available on, I believe, on Brevard County's or Space Coast Government TV's website or Facebook page. At least the first one was. No? Not anymore?
I've had difficulty. I had to go back and look at a meeting, and it wouldn't, there was very limited functionality on the Facebook page.
Okay.
There wasn't a link on the county website, so I had to get county Space Coast TV to burn it on a disc for me.
Okay, well, I know the goal, Terry, was to, once the meetings are done on Space Coast Government, because that website is not mobile accessible, to then put it on the Facebook page. And I think you can download videos from Facebook pages that are shared, so you could then pull it down to your system, and that may give you the ability, depending on your video player, to play it at like 2 times the speed or whatever it is you wanted to do. Again, this is really complicated and technical stuff that can be made easier. So we'll look to do that, or maybe hopefully someone in the community stands up and wants to do that.
Okay, thanks.
Could I make
Marilyn, can we take your comment in the public comments section?
Could I make a quick comment
John,
on that?
Yes.
The county's regular meetings are posted on the Space Coast Government TV, and they're linked within hours to the agenda. So it doesn't take them very long to take a very long agenda and link up each of the items to where they appear in the video. And so, I use it all the time to do all sorts of things. I think that would be a stopgap between trying to get to things quickly now and then getting the public involved in editing the video and taking segments and, and proposals coming in later. But it seems like somebody should be able to do that very quickly in the Space Coast Government TV, even if we have to pay for it.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on to field trips.
Where are we going?
Yes. There's been discussion of members or the whole committee going on field trips to various locations based on the presentations that have been made so far. And the question is, how do you deal with sunshine law requirements in that situation? There is an exemption from sunshine law for advisory boards for inspection field trip type events. And what that looks like is you don't have to comply with the typical notice and minute taking. However, there is no discussion on the trip or at the site or on the way back about any committee business, any opinions about what an individual member would recommend as far as a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. So those are the limitations. The minute you step over those boundaries, it becomes a public meeting and you have to comply with all the notice, minutes, and public access requirements. That being said, government entities subject to sunshine should be concerned about perception. So typically what is recommended for field trips is, even though notice is not required, we want to present this and be transparent about what's going on. So there is public notice through press release that this is going to happen. Staff has talked about chartering bus or transportation to the locations, and it is recommended that the public and the press be offered seats in that transportation arrangement, or if they want to drive themselves, they are certainly invited to attend the field trip using their own transportation. There's also been some discussion about having a lunch meeting or a holiday party, and I don't recommend that. The Attorney General's office does not recommend that. You can try to comply with sunshine law requirements for notice. Public access gets dicey because you're not going to be seated like this having a round table conversation, and also taking minutes gets a little tricky. So I've seen other advisory boards bring treats at December meetings and things like that, and that's about the extent of social activity that I've seen or would recommend to you.
Okay, thank you. It sounds complicated. So I think we get a more
meetings, just don't do it.
Unless there's a field trip that is really going to be valuable and maybe draw public attention.
Well, you all had requested or shown interest in two different field trips. One is to the Fenner House to see the living shoreline there, and that one is close enough that people could drive themselves, and we could all have a tour together, and if you knew the rules, which you now know, I think, that could happen that way, to just see that site for those who are interested. The other one was to go to the FOA site to see all these different kinds of septic alternatives that are out there, and that site is located over near Lakeland, and so that's why I thought we needed to organize transportation so that we don't have 20, 40 different people driving separate vehicles back and forth. If you want us to organize either of those, we will do so, but I wanted you to understand the rules of the game before we went there.
Okay, Terry.
Are either of these sites available for just public access?
Sure, the
private
Field
citizen
Manor,
go
sure.
Yeah.
See Fenner House, or what's the other one?
Sorry,
House
Fenner
is
House is, I'm sorry, that's
Yeah, it's Field
I had the
Manor.
wrong site. It's called
Field Manor. I think it's called Field Manor, yeah.
Field Manor.
Yeah, it's just a historic home, and the University of Central Florida has had a living shoreline program going there a couple years, and I'd recommend it.
I'm
And they
sorry,
would
what's the
love
name again?
I think it's called Field Manor.
Field
on
Manor.
North Merritt Island.
Yes, North Merritt Island.
And FOA site, what is that?
Florida On-Site Wastewater Association, I think that's what it was. Roxanne,
Just go up.
yeah.
She's
Well,
present our
presented-
last meeting.
Because it's not open for public visitation?
I think
They-
that it is. They do training there.
Yeah, they have specific
to
trainings that
organize
you
it.
sign up for. I don't know that they're just open if you arrive at the
Right.
door. But they have invited us to come see, and they would, walk us through, and they would organize an event.
So to
an
me,
educational event for
that's
us.
one of the topics of interest for me personally, right? So do they make their information available somehow? Are there packages, presentations,
Yeah, we can get on their
papers?
website.
Their
Maybe there's an
website is
opportunity.
very limited, which is why she invited us to the site.
I think she indicated she didn't even have a website.
It's in
There is something, I went there was not much available.
Might I suggest, unless it's critical to the functioning of this committee, that this is very labor-intensive, it's time-intensive, it gets all tangled up with sunshine, it gets tangled up with transportation, and a whole bunch of other stuff. It doesn't smell to me like it's worth the effort, unless something comes along that's very specific, and the only way we can wrap our heads around it is to be there and listen and see.
right,
I
so
would
why
suggest
don't
this
I-
not be a function of the committee.
Get the proper name and address of the Field Manor
Manor.
site, which is open to the public, and anybody who's interested could go at any time, so I'll provide you that information. I think staff will take a trip over to Lakeland, and we can, at that point, find out if any of you are interested. And, maybe it's only one or two and much easier.
That's the one that I would be interested in, because.
Me too.
Me too.
I think when we get into projects being able to understand what that means is important. But I understand that if it's, if we have to get a bus and stuff like that, I think that would be difficult for y'all to do.
I was going to get a van pool from
Okay.
SCAT.
Yeah, see, that would be somewhat easier, but, yeah, that would be an interest to me personally.
Can I ask Christine a question? If you can give me a quick opinion. For not related to this reasons, I'm interested in learning more about septic systems. One of my rental properties, 1963, it needs to be repaired. And Terry's interested in this also. Would it violate anything if the two of us jumped in my truck and we drove over to Lakeland and we took a tour of this thing just to learn about it and came back? Would that violate anything? Because we're both on the committee, and obviously we're going to talk about, oh, look, we just saw all these septic systems.
Well, you wouldn't want to discuss anything that would come before this committee as business. You can gather information, and then you can come back and give a report to this committee, and then have that discussion in the sunshine. The point is not to have that discussion outside of the sunshine.
And I would make a
think that's doable.
recommendation.
I mean, we're out there gathering data, right? We're trying to get smarter to make a
Can I
contribution.
make a
as-
recommendation? If we were to go to that, I would do that on an organized tour by the county staff, because you two going by yourselves, you may not discuss anything, but the perception's there.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So,
That's all I'm
yeah,
asking.
So that would be my advice as a
I mean, I
longtime
might just
government
drive
person.
over there alone, but it certainly makes more sense if you want to go and he wants to go, that we jump in the car, but I don't want to create any misperception.
Yeah, I would
Well,
make sure
Virginia
that
said
it's on an
she's
organized
going
tour
to be
of county staff.
organizing something, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, well, the FOWA public service announcements.
Yes, exactly.
So these, when Roxanne presented at the previous meeting, she said that these were available and you were interested in these, so I hope to get these posted on our new website as soon as we're allowed to post
Do
them.
you ever wonder what happens to water when it goes down the drain? If you're like most septic owners, you probably don't give it much thought until you have to, and that can be a mess. There are some simple rules to follow. Don't treat your sink or garbage disposal as a garbage can. Always protect your drain field and have your septic tank pumped every 3 to 5 years. Following a few simple rules can lengthen the life of your septic system and save you from costly repairs. This message is brought to you by the Florida On-Site Wastewater Association. For more information, visit FOWAonsite.com. Do you ever wonder what happens to water when it goes down the
So these are radio, that's why there is no video. They're just radio announcements. There's a 30-second one that you just heard, and there's a 60-second one. So you want me to play the 60-second one?
Water, H2O. Where does it come from and where does it go? An on-site wastewater disposal system is a fancy way of saying septic system. A septic system works best when you follow a few rules. In order to maintain your septic system, you must have your septic tank pumped by a service professional every 3 to 5 years. Never pour oil, grease, coffee grinds, or flushable cat litter down your sink. Never put paints, solvents, pesticides, or drain cleaners down your drains. Refrain from using your garbage disposal as a garbage can. Practice water conservation whenever possible. Direct water runoff from downspouts and roofs away from the drain field area. Do not run heavy equipment such as cars and trucks across the drain field area. This allows the soil to remain loose, absorbing more water. Compacted soil absorbs less water and can create problems. This message was brought to you by the Florida On-Site Wastewater Association.
Great. Okay. Moving to new business. Start with discussion around the proposal for canal surveys. That's the MRC one?
Right. So at the previous meeting, I had suggested that we get proposals to use this program to continue mapping muck, specifically in the canals where we don't have that information now and we need to prioritize where we want to dredge within canals for the plan. And so this is the proposal that we received back. I know forwarded this proposal to you very recently, and there was some feedback on wanting some more backup for where these costs came from. I've requested that backup. I don't have it yet, so we can hold off on this to wait for that additional information. But I wanted you to see sort of that order of magnitude of what we were talking about. We think that 4 to 5 field events of this scale might capture all of the canal areas that would be of interest to the plan. So.
Well, in light of what we discussed today, when we talked about larger surface areas, does this still have versus the deeper pockets? Is this still as important?
The reason that this is important, and I wish Dr. Trefry were still here, especially if you look in an area like Grand Canal and all the feeder canals that feed into Grand Canal, there is so much potential for that material to move into the lagoon. It's fluxing an enormous amount of nutrients to the water column that are constantly in touch and flowing out of that system into the open lagoon. And so the majority of the planned dollars are designated for those big open areas. I think it's about $26 million that is designated for canal systems, and it's definitely not enough to do all the canals. The idea was to go through a prioritization process to figure out which canals are impacting water quality in the lagoon the most and should be the priority. And so this would be one step in helping to prioritize the canals. We would follow this up with the flux measurements that Dr. Trefry's team has developed. So this would help identify where is the muck. Then we could send his team to where the muck is, so they're not wasting time trying to find the muck, but going to straight to where the muck is to identify which muck is fluxing the most releasing the most nutrients into the water column.
And so this price, the $5,200, we're talking about 4 times?
4 or 5 times, yes.
So why, this is peanuts, okay? Somewhere there has to be, what do you say, 25K max, 25K of discretionary money that we could either turn on as a committee, or you could find it and so on. I dragging this out month after month to screw around with 5K at a whack is not a sensible way to get the job done. So is there some mechanism that's legal and correct from a parliamentary viewpoint that we could move this forward and put the decision, the expertise in your hands rather than us sitting around the table as either experts or amateurs spending a lot of time to spend 5K? Is there an answer to that? Is there some way to move forward? Is there a motion that could do that?
I believe that legally staff has that authority now. It's a matter of, what the committee wants.
I would move to go ahead and approve it.
Just to make a comment, I mean, I agree with you, John, it's peanuts. And I support the initiative. The thing I would suggest is has there been time to do any evaluation of the data that was collected by the pilot project to be able to say the committee has looked at this data, seen the value of it, seen the cost effectiveness of spending 25K or whatever the number's going to be?
I support the project. It's we're using volunteers, and it's costing us $10 per sample. I have a difficult problem paying $500 per day to the citizen science coordinator.
Can I jump in there? Because I wanted to respond to you last night.
Thank you.
But I couldn't.
Yeah, I know.
I was going to ask today, would you please hold your comments till meetings?
Right.
Emails
should be sent to Virginia.
If Jared put this proposal together, I'm going to smack him because he knows better than that. He's been a student in my classes, and I was on his thesis committee.
I was going to send him a message.
It's not $500 a day. There's samplings that go on, and you have to remember, when scientists get back to the laboratory, they do other things than say, well, we had a great day out fishing today. They're back there processing data for weeks. And so the last meeting we had, when MRC came by, when Lisa came by and gave us an update on muck finders, they showed us the results that they've gotten so far, but that map did not get generated the same day as the samples were collected. And so
that
it's
was my
clear
question, John.
And that's why I think John's right. We should not be worrying about stuff like this. Is a great bargain. It's an incredible bargain for the quality of the work that's being generated. And so I would suggest give Virginia the authority, let her go. The boat rentals, I don't know the last time you rented a boat or not, but I've rented pontoon boats for work on the lagoon, and it costs $500 a day to rent the darn things. It just drives me crazy. And so these costs are real.
Okay.
And they're very defendable. It was a poorly written proposal.
And I hope that I was obviously upset, but I hope that in there it said, please explain it to me, and you just have.
Where is it?
Okay.
Well, it shouldn't be my job to do that. I'm supposed to be here making sure the money's being spent correctly. And MRC should have been here today to be able to do that themselves. But I, like John, don't want to drag this out for another month.
But I don't want to waste, $5,000 is nothing. And the results we're getting is...
Yes, okay.
Madam Chairman, I have a motion. I move that we extend to county staff the sense of the committee that you are encouraged to undertake one $5,000 project like this and come back to us with a plan for additional mapping.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
I'm not
Do we have discussion here? Okay, let's go back to discussion.
I want to extend to county staff the sense of the committee that they be encouraged to undertake one such project as we see here on their own
because they already have the authority,
and then come back to us with a plan for more extensive river muck mapping.
Can I just add something? Satellite Beach and Indian Harbor did muck surveys on all their canals already, and that was done with Atkins. So this is supplementing other areas. I just want to let them, MRC, and I'll call them to let them know we have a pontoon boat and they're welcome to it if they need it, so they don't have to rent a boat.
And do you know what it cost that city to do those?
It was significant. Mine was $27,000, yes, for a consultant.
Virginia, do you have a path forward if this motion passes?
Yes.
Can we expand that? Instead of one time, can we make it, if they're going to need to do it 4 times, can we just authorize 4 times and 20 grand so we don't sit here and discuss 5 every time? And
I would amend my motion to up to 5 WACs, 5K away.
Okay. And do we have a second? A second. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, measure passes.
Thank you. And we will, the next area that they're going to collect, which is funded with separate dollars, not Lagoon tax dollars, is in an area that has also been done by Atkins or Taylor. And so we are going to compare the muck finder data to the consultant data. We'll also do that when we get to the Grand Canal, and so that will be our verification of the process.
Okay.
Nice work for that.
Okay, Virginia, were you going to set up the item E?
Yes. So we received a request, and we've had several meetings with city managers discussing the cost of stormwater projects and the variability of those costs depending on where you are, in an urban area, on the barrier island, where property costs more money, where land is more limited, options are more limited, costs are higher. And the way that the plan is set up, we identified high-priority projects across the entire county, all 3 sublagoons, and we calculated the average cost per pound of nitrogen removed, and that was what we were offering folks who were interested in submitting substitute projects. So table ES1, that first table, shows that $88 per pound countywide average cost per pound of nitrogen removed for stormwater projects. There is another table in the plan, in the adopted plan, table 26, that shows what those costs per pound are within each segment of the lagoon. And so the Banana River Lagoon, the average cost per pound is $96. The North Indian River Lagoon, the cost per pound is $92. And the Central Lagoon, the cost is $77. So some of the Banana River communities asked, can we give them, can we cost share with them at the $96 rate instead of the $88 average? If we do that, and there's certainly, some reason to do that, then in order for the plan cost to not increase, we would need to decrease the Central Lagoon projects to $77. We've already committed to some Central Lagoon stakeholders at the $88 average. Is everybody following me? Mm-hmm. So the bottom table is something for you to consider. If we increase the Banana Lagoon stakeholders to the $96, that's the average for that area, increase the Northern Indian River Lagoon to $92, which is the average for that area, and held the Central Lagoon constant at the plan average of $88 instead of decreasing to $77. The overall cost for all stormwater projects in the plan, if we did that, is that number at the bottom, the $180,944. So my question is, do you want us to proceed with something like this or not, or do you have some completely different idea for how to handle it?
Courtney?
This is great. And I think this needs to be done because you see some of the beachside cities struggling with even submitting because we're just not getting what the juice isn't worth the squeeze, really, for lack of a better way to put it. So I think, this is definitely would be helpful to those communities that have higher land costs and have more urban areas and much more difficult tasks of doing stormwater projects. So.
But do we have the authority to do this? Our authority is to recommend to the county commission changes in the plan on an annual basis.
Correct.
This would be a salutary plan, and I think grandfathering the $88 is an intelligent thing to do. Is this not something that's part of our annual lagoon plan change recommendation? Not something we deal with now?
So you're right. This would be a recommendation that the COC would make to the county commission. You could wait until next year.
We could do it now?
Or you could direct me to do it now. And I could, see the earliest agenda I can get on.
The impact at the maximum is 0.17% increase, and we've made more than that in interest. If I can make a motion, I move that this board recommend the approval of using Table 26 for year 0 and go forward projects.
Okay, is there a second?
What about the 88?
I would use
What?
No, it's the unnumbered one.
Oh,
You can't make that motion, but I can.
you're right.
The
I
staff
can't.
recommendation.
Actually, we have to maintain it. We have to pay the 88 we committed to.
Yeah. So you could phrase that as the proposed cost share table
And
provided by
Stephanie, you're
staff.
correct. Stephanie needs to do that, please.
I'll move that with the correction that Courtney made.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
And then any more discussion?
I have a question. I want for
Yes.
Virginia, will this expedite these projects, or will it not change anything if it were tabled until our presentation to the county commission in the spring?
I guess the question is if you want it to be retroactive to all projects. There are a number of projects that are wrapping up right now, and we would be trying to make those reimbursements. We could always, after the fact, recalculate and send them a second check, but it would be cleaner
Sounds like it's
to make it
easier.
retroactive now and get it done. And especially if we can get the county commission to approve it before the October 12th training, then the cities know what they're dealing with in terms of putting new projects together for the next round.
And there may be cities that are not, as Courtney said, are not even considering submitting because they know that there isn't enough money to make it worth their while.
John?
And I just wanted to be clear on what's going to happen in the future. 96 and 92 for Banana River and North IRL, and then it's going to be 88 for Central from here on out. And so, and so why not raise them all to 96? I mean, we're just arbitrarily raising the 77 to 88. And so I'm not sure that, I mean, it just seems to me if you're going to raise one, I mean, the reason the 88 came about was the average of the three. So if you raise the lowest one, then why not raise the others too? I'm going to vote for this, and it just doesn't seem like, it seems like the concern is for projects that have already been funded.
Yeah.
But for future, shouldn't it go back to 77?
I would suggest exactly that. The 88, if we went from 88 to 77 now, it would be a clawback on projects that are already underway. But I think going forward for projects that are not yet underway, that we follow Table 26 precisely, 96, 92, and 77.
Okay.
And could that be part of the sense of this motion?
That would
Well, we've
consensus.
already had it. Do
Yep.
we have a
Well,
second?
we haven't stated it. That was my intent.
I can
Amend your motion?
Yes.
And I will, ignoring all parliamentary procedure, amend my second. And we're good, I'm good.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay.
May I restate the motion to make sure I got the intent?
This is crazy.
For years 0 and 1, we're going to use $96 for the Banana River, $92 for the North Lagoon, and $77 for the Central, $88 for the Central Lagoon. For years 2 through 10 and beyond, we're going to use 96, 92, and 77 for Central. Okay.
And you're going to sell that to the commission?
Is that subject to like inflation? Is there any mechanism in place for?
There is not.
Okay, good answer.
Okay. And now I'm going to need a motion to extend just for another 15 minutes. We might not need the whole thing, but we do have our general public comments. And do we have a
Move to
motion?
extend the meeting 15 minutes.
Okay, and a second?
I will second it.
Okay, Jean seconded. And all those in favor say aye. Aye, opposed? Okay. So let's open it up to general public comment to start, and then conclude with comments from the committee members.
Hello, I'm Marilyn Waters with the Brevard Indian River Lagoon Coalition. And back to the communication discussion. Some of you I saw who attended the MRC assembly, which was on social marketing. And social marketing is about behavior change. It's not about blasting out information. And there were a couple of speakers at that program who have worked on programs just like you're talking about within the state of Florida. They're research-based, and they have proven results. And they include citizens, landscapers. They found one of the influencers were people who worked for the county who were out doing the maintenance, and they would get questions about, well, they're blowing the grass everywhere. So they were included. But you have, and we have access to those programs almost for free. You might have to pay for some logos and some video transfers, but I'm happy to get with Vinny and whoever and share that information. But I just wanted you to know that those are behavior change programs, which is really what we need here, instead of just, hey, here's a piece of paper to read. So I just want to offer that to you. And then secondarily, I want you to know that 2 weeks ago, the Brevard Zoo opened up a new small exhibit that is a living shoreline. So if you go to the zoo and go to the little conservation kiosk, you can see living shoreline, coquina rock, and then a seawall. And it's very easy to compare all of those. So if you want just a little mini view, that's a great way to go and see that.
Great.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Anything else from the audience? Yes, Mary.
Mary Spar. I think you had some really great discussion today, and Dr. Listopad was talking about the reuse water and the COC here. You were discussing the educational component, and I think that, Stephanie has a point that, there's some things that the League of Cities can do without funding from the referendum project plan. But there's also something that you could do, and that is, I believe you're going to have a workshop with the applicants, and I'm hoping that you'll open the door to have the applicants be willing to have an educational component as part of their project submittal, whether that be for muck dredging, because you can educate the people who are around the muck dredging project, or whether that be the septic tank conversion. You can educate them on what else they can do, maybe with regard to fertilizer or with the reuse water. It could be the stormwater projects that you could educate, people with, and these applicants could include a component of that in their submission, or the septic upgrade, which we heard about last month. And to have a willingness, maybe not a total thought-out plan, but at least some budget for coordinating with the nonprofits, or as MJ pointed out, to use the information that was at the MRC Communications Assembly, because we all know that we have to change behavior, and social marketing is the way to go. And I know that, you're well aware of this, but I know the state, I was in communication with the DEP, and for their grant program, they are asking on the application to include their plans for education, and that's factored into the ranking. So we have only $125,000 a year for education. I think that maybe be one fifth of 1%, something like that, and it cuts out after 5 years. We've got to find a way to open the door to effective education for our residents, whether they live in homeowners associations, whether they live wherever they live. They can do more, and I appreciate all the efforts of Vinnie in getting the communication. I've seen your dashboard and stuff, and you know, the efforts of the city, but we've got to do more, and can that be included on the application, perhaps even considered by the committee when you make your decision? That's my question.
Let's come up. Is it related to her last question? Yeah. Okay, do we want to discuss Mary's strategy of leveraging?
Well, if I could, one of the things I wrote down, I'll bring it up now for when we're talking committee stuff. The communications, $125K a year, 5 years, I think that's too constraining. It's focused on fertilizer. There are two questions. Question one is it the right amount? And question two is, does it have a broad enough scope to do what we need? I think the path forward might be to request county staff to come forward with both a dollar amount proposal and a scope proposal as part of our annual recommendations for changes to the Lagoon plan. I think there's a lot of trade space. Mary Spar, you make marvelous. We didn't talk beforehand, but if we had, we'd have been in violent agreement on everything you said. I think that if we're going to change lifestyles, if we're going to spend this 10 years worth of trust fund money wisely, there's got to be a change at the end of this for how people live around the lagoon. And ultimately, communications, education is part of it. So I don't know what the dollar amount is. I think 125K is pretty small, especially since we are piling up more money than we expected. And I think to focus only on fertilizer is very, very narrow gauge. Could you come back to us at an appropriate time before we make the recommendations on potential changes to the Lagoon plan with what is perhaps a wiser approach to education and communications? Is that a legitimate thing to ask?
And I think that's a little different than what Mary was asking, was that can we include or at least list as one of our recommendations for proposals that they include some sort of education, be that, I mean, it doesn't have to be a lot, but basic signage or, you know, neighborhood education.
Excellent.
So we can certainly add something to the form, the information that were requested. What do they have an education plan? How much are they spending on their education plan? We've developed a checklist that you'll be able to use when you're evaluating the applications, and so we can add that to your checklist so that you can give some sort of, you know, evaluation to that component as well. We can look at, you know, other options in terms of the plan update for changing, widening the scope.
Dollars and scope.
Dollars and scope. Do you, and I heard you say, you know, the dollars are coming in ahead of schedule. So you want us to look at just increasing those dollars, understanding that we didn't budget everything that we expected to come in. There is some wiggle room out there anyway, or do you want this to come out of muck dredging or, you know, some other component of the plan?
I would argue, tell us what the right size is. And the second question is, where does it come from? And I think right now we could say it comes out of excess revenues and not have to steal from anywhere else.
And understanding that effective education, or the paradigm shift that we're talking about and changing our culture, that needs to be loaded up front.
Which is why we did it in the first 5 years instead of all 10.
Right.
The front-loading concept was...
Two different things. So first I'd like
Right.
to address Mary's, and I agree with her that we could put in the application, again, you get points. Maybe you put 0, maybe you fill it all out. But as part of the application, what education do you have as part of your septic or whatever? The second question, which is what John's raised, is there enough money for that? It's very focused on fertilizer. I think that's the plan. So I would like to make sure that we're not violating the spirit of the plan, was this is how much money and this is what it's to be for. And maybe I misunderstood. And the fact that we're raising more money up front doesn't mean that we need to be spending it yet.
This would be a recommendation, a recommended change to the Lagoon plan to say, in substance, we think there ought to be some dollars here, whatever the amount is, and the scope ought to be broader than fertilizer. Inside the current plan, we're constrained to communicate about fertilizer programs.
I'm okay with that.
I think we're in violent agreement on that.
I think
too.
so. But that's what the plan says. Now, do we want to go outside of, recreate the plan is what
Yes,
you're asking?
I think the answer is yes. We're going to change it anyway. We do that annually just to accommodate special projects.
You know, the way we came up with that 125 and specifically for fertilizer was sort of looking at what sort of outreach is already going on and where's the low-hanging fruit in terms of making behavior change that results in less nitrogen or phosphorus to the lagoon. And so that was what we identified, the outreach to box stores on fertilizer. That's where we thought we could make a good dent early on. I think since the writing of that plan, through the communications assembly and through, we had Dr. Martha Monroe here. I had a meeting with her and a bunch of other educators that afternoon. There have been a lot of other ideas that have come forward. The grass clipping stuff that came out of the MRC assembly, those tools are there. So we could look at what are the potential nutrient removal benefits of a grass clipping campaign? What are the potential nutrient reduction benefits of looking into these reuse areas, mapping them, going door to door, whatever outreach we need to do that's specific to getting people to understand if they are in reuse and they're getting more nutrients than they need from their reuse water, they don't need to fertilize. We can try to quantify what those benefits would be to determine what level of funding would be appropriate and consistent with everything else in the plan.
If the idea was, for example, we came up with a little test kit and people could test, that to me is right there within the money and the fertilizer and the intent of the plan. I just don't want to go outside of the intent of the plan just because more money's rolling in.
Well, 125 isn't a lot of money.
It's not relevant whether it's a little or a lot. It's relevant that it's being spent correctly.
Okay.
This is my point on that $5,000. There's waste in there, and I just want to point it out at every level.
Stephanie.
I don't think that that's the point, that we're going necessarily outside the original plan.
Okay.
The idea is that a lot of what we're doing is we are fact-finding, and now we're getting more information, and that information is what's driving a change in the plan. It's not just that we've decided, oh, well, we need a little bit more money, and we have extra money, so we're just going to throw it at something. No, these are all educated decisions that are coming out of data that we're now receiving that we didn't have when we started. I mean, I didn't know, I don't even think Dr.
Claudia.
Listopad,
Good job.
she didn't realize that the reuse water was going to have 27%. She didn't know that until she actually generated the data. We're now getting data back that is driving this decision that we need to educate in some areas that we didn't know when we started. And that's the whole reason to reevaluate the plan every year. So I think this is very important. I think we do need to broaden the scope. And like you said, the grass clippings, we've also had these experts coming in that are telling us that there, are documented research-based methods for changing opinions and changing behavior. And so we need to utilize the new information that we have. I think that's important.
And I would note the referendum that was passed by the voters is a half-cent sales tax for 10 years, not a dollar amount. Our job is to spend that money wisely, not to spend just the 320 meg that we saw when we originally passed this. We have an obligation to figure out how to sop up what for a while looks like it's going to be excess funds. This seems to be an extraordinarily high leverage way to do that.
And the economic analysis showed that was the biggest bang for the buck.
Yeah.
So, okay, we had another audience question or comment.
My name's Jenny Lamb. I'm from the city of Melbourne. And I just wanted to point out on some earlier discussions that were held, or that were had here, that you had mentioned if the cities can get a common voice and get a common message out. And that has been going on for quite a few years, because many of the cities and the county are part of Blue Life. We contribute funds to Blue Life to have that message. So I think the cities will be on board for that, because we've already been doing some of that. And then the second point that I wanted to bring up, and Courtney touched on this a little bit, was that we, as the city of Melbourne, is required to achieve a goal, or that we are required, and I think that they might be backing off on it a little bit, but for our consumptive use permit for our water production facility, in order to get that use or that amount of water, we had a goal of 50% of reuse from our treatment plants, our wastewater treatment plants, our water reclamation plants. So many of these permits weren't that, we were trying to get away with things, or that we were trying to do, that was what was required in order for us to be able to provide the amount of water to and it's not just City of Melbourne, because we're a regional water provider. So I think, and I've been saying this for a while, I mean, I feel like I have two hats on. I have a stormwater hat on, and then we have the utilities hat on. And for some of the areas, such as St. John's and DEP, both of those agencies, I don't feel that their stormwater and their water production or their reclaim area, they were talking to each other. And I see some of that happening now in those permitting efforts. So I just wanted to make that point. So that was all.
Because it's all one water.
Exactly.
Okay, any other comments? We're going to make it. Okay. I think that, yes. Oh, that's right. We need some comments here. Go ahead.
On water reuse or reclaimed water, I think there's a lot of information there, and I don't know how much, how germane that is to our lagoon, but I think maybe there's an opportunity for a panel discussion there on reclaimed water. Dealing with why the nutrients in it are calculated the way they are, possible expansion of a program like that. If it's a net good thing for our lagoon, maybe it's worthy of expansion throughout the community. I know I don't have it at my house, for example. So that's something I would encourage and would love to attend.
Good suggestion.
Committee comment very quickly. It's been raised that we want to consider canceling meetings now and again. I would like to voice my obdurate opposition to that. Our job is oversight, seeing these monthly reports, looking at the numbers, knowing what's going on, I think is what the County Commission expected of the Citizens Oversight Committee. And I, for one, would be dead set against canceling meetings unless it's a hurricane the week before. And guess what? We still got together on that. So, thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, well then we're adjourned. We'll see you next month. Thank you.
2 minutes to spare.
Hey, Vinny, can I check?
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.